Good afternoon, and welcome to the Joint Governance General Session meeting. Please note that today's call is being recorded, and currently all attendees are in a listen-only mode. There will be opportunity for public comment throughout today's call, and we will make sure to give you all instructions on how to enter the public comment queue at that time. With that, I'd now like to formally begin today's call and turn it over to Bert Gross. Please go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Bert Gross, Deputy General Counsel. Welcome to the Joint General Session of the ISO Board of Governors and WEM governing body. Before we go into the agenda items, the first order of business is to do the roll call, which I will do now, starting with Governor Borenstein.
Here.
Chair Campbell.
Here.
Member Decker.
Here.
Chair Etta.
Here.
Member Konziolka.
Here.
Vice Chair Leslie.
Here.
Governor Reynolds.
Here.
Governor Shorey.
Here.
Vice Chair Smith. And Member Wagner.
Here.
Okay, we are all here and accounted for and have a quorum, so we can dive into the agenda now. Before I go into the actual agenda, though, just first a word about public comment. Today we are in a hybrid session where there are both people in the room here with us today, as well as, of course, many people online. And the process for making any public comments is different depending on which place you're at. So within the room, as I think most people are aware, if you want to be making a public comment, you should fill out a public comment card there to the left, to my left in the room on the table where the materials are generally kept. If you would just make that, put that card, write down that card, then we will know that you want to make a public comment, and we will, when the time comes, observe that and have you make the comment. With respect to those who are on the line, the operator will, as he, I think already mentioned, will identify how to raise your, well, you need to raise your hand on Zoom, and then he will identify how to go about making the comment. With that out of the way, the first agenda item that we have today is the chair's welcome, which is then followed by general public comment opportunity. So for the first now, I will turn it over to the chairs for their welcome, and I think I am turning it over first to Chair Campbell.
Great, thank you, Bert. And we do have a practice that was started before I just became chair of the governing body, where we sort of alternate who speaks first. I don't think anyone else is going to notice it, but we notice it. But thank you all for coming today, both virtually and in the room. This is for the July 15th, 2026 Joint General Session. It's a robust agenda, a number of meaty items we'll talk about. We're going to get to hear directly from some invited stakeholders on one of those items, or two of those items. I'm looking forward to that. I'm also really eager to hear the latest on the extended day-ahead market. That's everyone's, of course, focused on how the market is going, and that's very exciting. If you've looked ahead at that presentation, you'll see not only do you get to see data on May, which has been out there quite a bit, there's some information on June performance that's in that presentation. So I'm looking forward to that. And the chairs of the two bodies, we have sort of staggered terms. As chair of the governing body, I'll overlap with the chair Edo for 6 months, and then another chair after that. But I think something I'm really looking forward to, of course, working closely with Chair Edo, especially on the formation of the agendas and making sure we're kind of putting together agendas that are going to be really compelling for the for stakeholder community as well as for our two bodies, and we're kind of hearing information together and deliberating together on important items. I'll turn it over to Chair Edo.
Thank you, Chair Campbell, and thanks everyone for coming. Andy has summarized, Chair Campbell has summarized the agenda well. I'm also very excited to hear about the latest analysis that Guillermo is conducting on, how our EDM market is giving us information to inform the congestion revenue allocation discussion that we're about to have. That's very important to me. I'm also very excited about the update from the Westwide Pathways Initiative. And I know they're making a lot of progress. I'm very eager to hear about that. I also would like to thank Governor Borenstein for again reminding us that we should be working in harmony with the environment rather than try to fight against it and adopt heat-friendly garb when the heat is such as it is. I looked at outside, I think it's about 102 today, 101 today. I know I talked to Dee Dee earlier. We're likely to hit the high peak load for the year. It's not the record peak load, but we're going to be right up there. And I hear that we have lots of surplus capacity, so that makes me feel very, very good. And again, let's go through this smoothly and comfortably and proceed onward. Finally, I'd like to comment on Chair
I
Campbell.
do want to just compliment the buildings people here in CAISO for not making us wear sweaters.
Which is a little bit of a contradiction, absolutely. But yes, I'm very much looking forward to working with Chair Campbell. We've had a number of discussions already, trying to ensure that the agendas are meaningful and useful both to the stakeholders and to our respective bodies in informing us on what's going on going forward. So very much a partnership I look forward to. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Our next item is an opportunity for general public comment, and this is specifically for general public comment on any matters that are either not on the agenda at all today or that are on the consent agenda. I should mention, as I will during each item, there have been no public comment letters on this topic. So far, at least in the room, we do not appear to have any general public comment on either the consent agenda or on matters not on the agenda. So with that, I think I will turn it over to Silas to check on whether there are any such comments online.
If you would like to speak under general public comment, you can please press the raise hand icon located at the bottom center of your Zoom screen. If you're dialed into the phone only line, you can press #2 on your telephone to enter the comment queue. At this time, there are no hands up in the comment queue.
Okay, hearing no comments, then we'll move on to the motion on the consent agenda. The only topic on the consent agenda today is approval of the general session minutes from the last meeting, joint general session. And so I'll go ahead and read the motion and then ask for a movement in a second. The motion is as follows. Moved that the ISO Board of Governors and WEM governing body approve the July 15th, 2026 consent agenda. Can I have a motion?
Yeah, so moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, and all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Let the record reflect that there was unanimous approval. Great. That takes us to the next agenda item, which is the CEO remarks.
Thank you. Chair Campbell, Chair Edo, governors, members of the governing body, pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I just have some very, very brief comments. Just wanted to acknowledge, first of all, how wonderful it is to be here as we enter into the heart of the summer and the heating season. Not only are we pre-cooling the building here today for the net peak, but we're also now operating with the new tool, the extended day ahead market, which is already proving to be really valuable for state awareness and visibility. I know the market's been operating very healthily. We'll hear more about that today, but it's just really nice to have summer of 2026 enabled with this new tool, and it's just great to see all of you. I just wanted to also reiterate, today's agenda is a very content-rich agenda, and I think when you look at the materials, the pathways briefing, the market update, the Spotlight initiative on demand distributed energy market integration, the briefing on congestion revenue allocation, something that I think all of us at the CAISO just are really pleased about is each of these initiatives represents, I think, two principles that we hold and two values that we hold very dearly here. And the first is transparency, right? Really getting this information out into the public domain and making sure we really understand these issues with depth. And I think there's even more opportunity in a couple of these areas to keep going. And also just collaboration, right? Just the partnerships that are represented with the formation committee. All of our partners who are coming here to talk about their perspective on load flexibility. Pacific Core, of course, just been so wonderful to work with going first on EDAM. And I just want to thank everybody who's logging time to be here today to share your perspectives. It enriches us, makes us stronger, and I think at the end of the day, it's going to help each of these initiatives be more sustainable. So excited for the conversation. It's been a great couple of days already, and looking forward to this afternoon. And back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I take it at this point, and that leads us on to the next agenda item, which is Formation Committee update. And I believe Stacy Crowley, our Vice President of External Affairs, will introduce that.
Good afternoon, Board of Governors and WEM governing body. I'm pleased, as always, to welcome Kathleen Stacks, Jim Shetler, and Evie Call to provide the briefing on the formation committee updates. Their work over the past several months has shown meaningful progress, and they are moving on to the next important phases. And so we look forward to their briefing, and I will just turn it over to Kathleen.
Thanks, Stacy, and thanks, Chair Edo and Chair Campbell. It is great to be back with you all today, virtually. And as soon as I heard you say that you are going with a more heat-friendly outfit, I took the sweater off that I put on because it's almost 100 degrees here in Denver as well. So appreciate the nod to the weather that we're all dealing with. So we are, again, I think as you've heard now a couple of times, really excited to share with you a lot of the progress that we've been making. We're going to cover quite a bit of the content that we presented to stakeholders at our last stakeholder meeting at the end of June. And even since then, in the last couple of weeks, we continue to make progress. And as we continue to bring that information to stakeholders and into some of these public forums, we will continue to update these bodies as well. So appreciate the opportunity. Let's go ahead and go into the next slide, please. And actually, Jim, if you are there, I might pass this piece over to you. Sorry for surprising you on that.
Not a problem. Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the Board of Governors and the governing body. Glad to be here. Overview real quick on where we're at with the board selection process. We did complete the outreach efforts at the end of June. And today the nominating committee did receive the long list of candidates that they are proposing for consideration. We had well over 100 considered candidates, and they've whittled it down to 25 for consideration by the nominating committee. Having had a chance to look at the list very briefly, I can say that we do have a broad range of very qualified candidates that to consider, and it's going to be a very difficult job to whittle that down to the final 5, which is a good place to be at. We're looking at getting to a short list here in early August. The nominating committee will do a first round of interviews in late August and narrow that down to a final list of candidates, probably in the 6 to 7 range. And then we're going to do some in-person interviews in September of that final list with the intent of being able to take that to the formation board for its final decision on a recommended slate at the end of September. And then the hope is we can seat the board sometime by mid to late October. So that's kind of where we're at right now. And as we move through, if you have questions, please let me know.
Thanks, Jim. So just a quick update on sort of where we are. I think we've mentioned this before. We're in the process of developing a briefing book for the initial board that we will be able to hand to them when they are seated in October. And this is essentially the outline that we've been building from. A lot of the work in our work groups is developing the content that's going to go into these various chapters. The one thing I did want to point out is that we originally thought we would have a chapter on the development of the RA program that some of the EDM sector entities and several others are in the process of developing. That is sort of given the timing that they're working from, it doesn't feel appropriate for it to be in this briefing book. So that's one thing that we've removed since the last time we shared this with you all. Next slide, please. So some of this work, as you'll see, does kind of bleed over into after the board is seated. There's a lot of work that will not be quite done. So really the purpose of this briefing book is to provide essentially a status update on all of the work that these work groups have been doing. There's, within some of these conversations, we are developing essentially proposals for how the board might consider implementing the recommendations that were in the final proposal. But again, ultimately, it will be up to the board to determine whether these are proposals they want to implement as is, whether they want to continue to get additional input, whether they want to change something on their own. It is entirely up to them to determine what it is that they put in place once they are seated. So getting into the actual work group updates, next slide, please. We have about 5 work groups that are meeting regularly, and we'll walk through each one of these. The regulatory structure update is something that Evie's going to cover at the end and has a little bit more content, since this is something that we've been engaging a lot with the CAISO team on. It is very much a work in progress, but we are making progress that we thought would be worth sharing with this group. Next slide, please. Jim, would you like to cover the finance piece again as well?
Sure. So overall, we're doing fairly well. We are living off of our contributions that have been made to date, and that continues to look good to get us through the third quarter of this year. As I believe the boards are very much aware, we are looking at doing a debt financing for the remaining cost of the stand-up of the row, a loan in the order of about $8 million. Waiting on the decision from FERC on the approval to allow the ISO to be the backer for that loan. We have interviewed a couple of banks and are in good shape that once we know for sure that FERC is approved, that we will move forward with negotiating a loan agreement with the intent of bringing that to the new board in October for their approval for funding. And then we also have seen several grants come in. And so we're sitting well with the budget and with the revenue stream to get us through this year, and then with the debt financing to get us through the rest of the cycle. And then I would just note real quickly that Kathleen and myself have been working on updating the budget for both this year and then some drafts for 27 and 28 with the intent of having those available to the new board when they're seated in October for their consideration. Did I leave anything out, Kathleen?
I think that's it. Thank you, Jim. All right, moving on. Another one of our work groups is our market oversight and data access work group. This is related to all the various market oversight functions and how the reporting structure for those functions will work between the ROW and the CAISO, as well as how how entities will have access to data and information. And so some of these are some of this work is based on the requirements in AB 825. Big thanks to the DMM and the team at the DMM who have been showing up and sharing their expertise and thoughts, as well as the CAISO team, and then also Chair Campbell, who has spent quite a bit of time with this particular work group, helping us understand how these things work in practice today. So we are very close to having a written proposal to reflect these various recommendations that we will be sharing. But we are excited and think that we have found a good way to meet the requirements in AB 825 and honor the recommendations that we had in the final proposal. Next slide, please. The next work group that we have is our tribal engagement work group. We started with a work group made up of some formation and launch committee members, and we have expanded this to include now representatives from several different tribes across the West. And so we're really excited that we're able to get input from tribes about what kinds of functions they have that relate to the market, how they want to start to think about how they might engage in some of these constructs. And then ultimately, we are going to be working with GridWorks to have them help us really manage this process and be very intentional and thoughtful about it, since there is a very wide-ranging spectrum of expertise, both with tribes and I think with other stakeholders about what it means to have tribal engagement in these kinds of processes. So this has been a very, really, I think, functional, positive work group. Commissioner Hauk from the CPUC has also been participating in this, and so it has been great to have a really broad set of expertise. Next slide, please. Next, we have been making a lot of progress on our stakeholder process. And again, big thanks to the CAISO team for lending their expertise since so much of our process is built on what the CAISO process has been. We put out a narrative of our stakeholder process proposal and kind of the details that this process will include. At our last stakeholder meeting at the end of June, we received 5 sets of comments last week and are in the process of reviewing those comments and determining what kind of changes we might need to make to be responsive to that stakeholder input. So I'll just touch on a handful of these things real quickly. Maybe next slide. The principles of the stakeholder process, these are our NERC principles. We thought that they applied really well to the kind of stakeholder process that we wanted the row to have. So we want to make sure that we are trying to balance all these various pieces, which at some point, of course, can be challenging. Doing something efficiently and comprehensively creates its own kind of special challenges as we're moving through, but this is something that we thought was really applicable. Next slide, please. Some of the key elements of the stakeholder process, we have a stakeholder representatives committee, which is sort of building on what the RIF has been in the CAISO stakeholder process, but has some pretty different functions. And so we have actually been working very closely with the RIF through this process as they've been doing their enhancements that reflect some of the recommendations for the stakeholder process along the way. We will continue to work with them, particularly over the course of the next year as the RIF sort of winds down its work and the SRC starts to come into existence, and making sure that we are exploring ways for those entities and the row itself to rely on the expertise and experience that the RIF has and has built over the years. The next element is the classification of stakeholder initiatives. We'll have essentially 3 different buckets of initiatives: those that are required for compliance with, for example, FERC orders. We will have those that are necessary for compliance with state and local public policy issues. And then we'll have the biggest bucket, of course, being the discretionary initiatives as well. The board will also have a public policy committee that is going to be tasked with doing outreach to state, local, federal, and tribal entities to get input at the beginning and the end of the stakeholder process to evaluate potential impacts to those entities by a proposed initiative, and using the stakeholder process to mitigate or eliminate those adverse impacts if possible. And then again, of course, to provide information to the board so they are making an informed decision when they get to that policy decision. And then finally, we are incorporating that indicative voting and public comment opportunity. Sorry, go ahead, next slide. This is just a quick visual representation of the Stakeholder Representatives Committee. This is really an organization function. It is not, the sectors do not have votes, but the SRC is really designed to ensure that there is communication and consensus building activities happening through the organizations and the sectors, and then feeding that back into the row staff and board, and then bringing, of course, input from the staff and board back out to their sectors and the organizations within them. So it is a structural function and an organizational function more than the sectors themselves having a say in the way things are happening. Next slide, please. And then much like the CAISO process, we'll have the catalog and roadmap process that identifies here's the workload that we've got ahead of us. And then once that roadmap is determined, we'll have the stakeholder initiative phase with the various components within that. Next slide, please. So with that, we'll transition to our regulatory structure work that we're doing. And I think we wanted to kind of remind everyone that this is the work that we're doing to really implement step 2. This is the transferring governance authority over the energy markets from the CAISO to the row, and then making sure that as we are building something to achieve step 2, that we are keeping the door open to that step 3. So this is a slide that we've been using in our presentations, really going back to our final proposal development, just to kind of show the full scope of the pathways path moving forward. So with that, we can go to the next slide and I'll pass it over to Abby.
Thanks, Kathleen, and good afternoon, Chairs Campbell and Edo, governors and members. As Kathleen indicated, the Pathways Initiative really presented a unique challenge in structuring a regulatory framework for the oversight of the Western energy markets. And that's because we are transferring the market governance to a new corporate entity, but we're retaining the operating role in the CAISO. So we have two entities involved in running the single market. And there's really not another model at FERC that looks just like this. Probably the closest one would have been in 1998 when the CAISO and the Power Exchange were first operational. But we understood this was going to be complex when we put together the three-step proposal, and we're now encountering that complexity and working through it. And it's requiring very close work with the CAISO team, and it's been hard work, I think, for everyone. And thank you for that energy you're bringing to it. And we've had to have a lot of creativity in designing a structure that will be clear, effective, and will preserve independence for the row. So with that, next slide. We've approached, go back one slide, I think. We've approached the task with a few objectives in mind. And first one is we need to secure the independence of the row governance of the markets. And that is paramount in this whole exercise we're going through. It must be independent. It must satisfy that criterion for the West to maximize the market footprint. The next objective is really to ensure accountability of the row and transparency in its exercise of its authority under FERC jurisdiction. And stakeholders will need to have a clear go-to document to really understand how the row is going to conduct the governance. So we had that in mind. We also have worked with the CAISO to understand that we need to preserve in all of this the CAISO's corporate structure and health by clearly defining the respective roles and the responsibilities of the two entities. In the early stages, the row is going to need to rely substantially on the CAISO, and we can't have that impacting the CAISO's financial health or their legal obligations in any way. We next had in mind establishing a flexible platform. Kathleen just walked through the three-step process. While we are in step 2, we had in mind step 3, which is expanding the scope of the services offered by the row over time. And then finally, and this one is getting harder and harder, but we want to have timely implementation. And we are targeting right now 1/1/28. We haven't changed that date yet. And there's a lot of work to be done between now and then. So the choices we're making really are being driven to some degree by timeliness. Okay, next slide. So with all these thoughts in mind, we have worked out a 3-part regulatory structure. 2 of the elements in the structure came from the step 2 proposal, and that is the CAISO's integrated market tariff and the coordination agreement or services agreement between the CAISO and the row. There is a new element, the 3rd element, and it's what we're calling the row governance tariff. That was not in the original proposal. But as we worked through it, and in particular, as we talked about the importance of independence, transparency, and accountability, it really dawned on us that the row needed a governance tariff to publicly share how it was going to go about its activities. So let's break down these 3 elements. Next slide is the CAISO integrated tariff. I think you're all very familiar with that, and it plays a central role in the structure. Step 2 contemplated that we would be relying on this integrated tariff as we transition the governance of authority to the row over the markets. And the tariff, as you know, comprises many things, and it includes things that will be within the row's sole authority, the CAISO's sole authority, and joint authority between the CAISO and the row. Obviously, the row's focus will be the sole authority over market rules, including the right to direct Section 205 filings at FERC. And the row costs are also going to be recovered through the tariff. So a good deal of work is going into trying to figure out which pieces of the integrated tariff belong solely to the row, to the CAISO, and jointly. So we are developing new rules to try to sort those sections out. Next slide is the row governance tariff. And the row governance tariff is the new piece, and it speaks again to the objectives of independence, transparency, and establishing a platform for the future evolution. And this tariff is going to belong to the row solely. So not only will it direct the Section 205 filings as it will with the market portions of the integrated tariff, but it's going to be administering the tariff too. So it's slightly different in process than the market tariff. And it's going to encompass all of Row's core functions. It's going to be tied in with the integrated tariff and the coordination agreement. So all three of those pieces will need to work together. And again, this isn't wholly a new idea. A similar structure has been created in Markets Plus and WRAP. So we actually started, I believe, with the Markets Plus Appendix O when we began to craft this governance tariff. Next slide. And this is the area that we probably made the least progress on at this point, but it's one of the most important areas. And that is the coordination or services agreement between the CAISO and the row. It's going to clarify the roles, rights, and obligations of the two entities in this venture. And I've identified a few issues on this slide that could be included. At this point, we have a general outline of the types of things that will be in that agreement. But again, it will be up to the board to work further with the CAISO and negotiate that agreement. And again, all of these pieces will provide transparency and clarity, not only to the parties, but it's intended to provide some clarity to FERC and also the public. Next slide. Just a reminder, as you know, the CAISO is going to maintain its roles as balancing authority, transmission operator, and reliability coordinator as the market migrates to the row. And then finally, next slide. The stepwise proposal, as Kathleen pointed out, contemplated evolution at some point toward step 3. And we always knew that while we were developing step 2, we had to have step 3 in mind so that we didn't create any obstacles to moving forward to a more robust structure in the future. So we've been thinking about what types of things could occur in the future. And again, they are just possibilities at this point. But most notably, we've been talking about expansions in the scope of service offerings. So creating the governance platform, for example, will help if there is an expansion of the scope of services because we already have an existing road tariff. We could eventually have standalone 205 authority on the market tariff rather than through the CAISO's delegation of that right. Definitely hope to reach a place of broader financial capability and responsibility. And when that happens, there may be an opportunity to migrate all of the market participation agreements from the CAISO, who will hold them initially, to the row. But again, I think that's these are all questions that we will deal with in the future. We're just being cautious not to foreclose them as we go forward in step 2. So I think with that, Kathleen, back to you.
Thanks, Evie. And of course, we're all happy to answer questions about any of that. But just to flag here, as we are nearing the end of our launch committee, formation committee engagement as we get closer to seating a board, we're going to have 2 more public stakeholder meetings, one in the middle of August and one at the end of September, to present the rest of the results of the work that the work groups have been doing, and then ultimately in September present our full briefing book to the 2 stakeholders in our public meeting before we hand it over to the initial board. So with that, we're happy to answer any questions, and thanks again for the opportunity. Oh, and actually one more thing before I pass it over, I do want to just again reiterate our ongoing thanks for engagement from from board member Shori and governing body members Decker and now Konziolka, who is stepping in as Andy or as Chair Campbell has stepped into the chair role. So we're very grateful for your time and your input and ongoing dialogue through this process. So I just wanted to flag that too.
Okay, thank you, Kathleen, Evie, and Jim, for that excellent presentation. Now would be an opportunity if the board or governing body members have any questions to ask them or comments. I see Jan.
Yes, I just wanted, well, let's say the admiration is mutual. First off, I suspect all of you are beginning to feel like Army volunteers doing all of this work without any compensation, but I did want to give you the recognition for the path that you have forged and the progress that you have made, and we're very close now. So keep up the good work, and I will continue to be looking over your shoulder as I have been in the past. Thanks.
Any other board governing body member questions or comments? Okay, seeing none. The next item is potential public comment on that presentation. That there are no comments apparently in the room. We've received no comment cards. So Silas, can you check to see if there are any comments or questions or comments online?
If you'd like to make a comment, you can press the raise hand icon on Zoom, or if you're dialed into the phone line, you can press #2. We do have one hand up in our queue so far. TJ Vargas, you've been sent a prompt to unmute yourself.
Yes, hi. TJ Vargas with the WR State Water Project. I was just wondering, what are kind of the next steps with the regulatory and statutory process that you mentioned?
Sure. So what we're hoping to do, again, as Kathleen pointed out, we're doing a briefing book for the board. And in the briefing book, what we hope to have is an initial draft of the governance tariff for the board to consider and refine and, continue to work on. We also intend to have rules put together for how we break down authority within the integrated tariff at some point, maybe a flow chart, something like that. And then we'll have the outline of the agreement. Those will then go to the board, who will work with the CAISO over the next 6 months to try to finalize all of those ideas as we have them now. And then the goal is to file them in the beginning of Q2 of 2027. So they would be filed for all three pieces will be filed, changes to the CAISO tariff, the agreement, and the row governance tariff will be filed at once, seeking FERC approval.
Will there be another public comment period, or would that be in the FERC process in those next steps?
I think that will be in the row board process that they define as they go forward with those documents. We have a stakeholder process we're working on there, so I would expect that the board would be, to some degree, looking for stakeholder input on some of these things.
Thank you. That's all that I have.
Silas, any further comments online?
No further comments.
Okay, with that, then we will turn it to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 5, market update. There are no public comment letters on this item, and I will turn that over to Anna McKenna, VP of Market Design and Analysis.
Thank you, Bert. Good afternoon, Chair Campbell, Chair Edo. I just went in the order of who was speaking first today, just to notice. And good afternoon, Board of Governors and governing body members and members of the public. It's nice to see so many people in the room, so it's really nice. I'd like to introduce today for the market update, Dr. Guillermo Bautista Alderete. He is the Director of Market Performance and Advanced Analytics. As noted by Chair Campbell earlier, there's some exciting information, and the focus of today's market update is on the EDAM market that's now been operational for over 2 months. And so with that, I will turn it over to Guillermo.
Thank you, Anna, for the introduction. Chairs Eto and Campbell, members of the Board of Governors and members of the governing body, good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be here today to provide a market update. Before I go into the matter of the briefing that you have in the books, I would like to take a minute to give you just an update, just in time, how we are doing for nowadays. It feels like finally we're in summer, and today we're going to be peaking so far for the year. We're going to be pretty close to 43,000 megawatts for the CAISO balancing area, pretty close to 10,000 megawatts for the Pac East balancing area. And so far, the market has shown a lot of strength. We don't foresee any shortfalls. We have been able to meet all the requirements for the demand, but also for the imbalance reserves. We procure indeed full requirements of the imbalance reserves across the EDAM footprint based on economic prices. We see that all balancing areas were able to pass both the upward and the downward resource efficiency evaluation. So the system is there. We have plenty of supply available to be able to handle this level of demand. And the market is working as intended. I think this is going to be the first test of the extended day-ahead market to see how it performs during more stringent conditions. And prices are in the relatively economic range. We have seen prices up to $70 so far, and we will see how today performs. When it comes to the real time, we have seen up to 10 different balancing areas opting for the assistant energy transfer. They didn't opt in just yesterday or 2 days ago. They have been there since June in preparation for the summer conditions. And as of this morning, there was only one instance of a failure where potentially the program is going to be effective. So at this point, we have all the signals that the market is performing well. And this level of demand is typical for the summer, nothing like the records that we have seen of 52,000 megawatts. So we still have in the good range of supply. With that in mind, let me go back to the actual content of the material. And before I go into the technical description, I would like to provide some context. And that is, the material that you have in this briefing is produced as quickly as we could to give you timely information. But in turn, it is preliminary. That data is subject to change, is going to change because of our internal processes. We're going to be reflecting, for instance, price corrections. That is going to change to some extent the settlements information. We have also identified several issues impacting either the market side or the settlements. That is not reflected in this update. That is going to come until we go into the next cycle of the settlements piece. The other piece of information is that, keep in mind, yes, we have about 2 months worth of data. This is first the most critical part of the transition because it's precisely the transition. We're expected to see some volatility, some movements that eventually get settled down. And the second piece is that the time of the year matters. May happens to be precisely the time of the year when we are moving from the shoulder months into the summer conditions. And typically, you are going to see an inflection point between April and May. So parts of the trends that you are going to see are not related to EDAM. It's just the natural seasonal conditions that we are moving into. Okay, can we move to the next slide, please? On May 1st, we successfully launched the extended day-ahead market. Concurrent with that expansion of the market, we also implemented a suite of enhancements, what we call the day-ahead market enhancements. That introduced new market products, imbalance reserves, reliability capacity, and also the incorporation of the greenhouse gas emission model into the day-ahead timeframe that we already have for the real-time market. This market now is able to explicitly procure for the requirements of these new products, imbalance reserves, reliability capacity, and more critically, is able to price explicitly for the value of that service. That is the new feature that we have aimed to have with this extended day-ahead market / day-ahead market enhancements. And this is done through the market, similar to what we do for energy and ancillary services. Now we're procuring flexibility, reliability through the markets with an explicit price signal. Next slide, please. Similar to the real time, we have a process before entering into the day-ahead market, which is the resource efficiency evaluation. This process ensures that every balancing area participating in the market has made sufficient supply available to be able to meet its own obligations for both energy and flexibility. We have upward and downward flexibility. In the illustration, you have a dark line that is the average demand for each balancing area. And then we have a tolerance band above and below. These are the bands for flexibility, up and down. So effectively, when we clear the day-ahead market, we co-optimize all these products, and we are ensuring that in addition to be able to meet precisely that demand forecast, we have positioned resources in such a way that if uncertainty happens, we are able to move in that range to absorb that uncertainty. So far, given the conditions of the year, given the supply that we have in the system, all three balancing areas have seen a very high pass rate. Effectively, for May and so far partial June, we have seen 100% of the time PAC East and CAISO passing the resource efficiency evaluation in both directions. We have one day where PAC East in early May failed a few hours, and that led to less than 100% passing rate. Still, overall, it's a high pass success rate of the test. Now that we have these new market products, the day-ahead market is optimally clearing for all these commodities concurrently. It's a co-optimization, making sure that the limited capacity is allocated where it's worth the most. And this is done across the expanded footprint of the market, Pacific East, West, and the CAISO balancing areas. And prices happen to be a very good first glance to see how the market is functioning. Now we have, in addition to energy, prices for imbalance reserves, for reliability capacity, and now in the day-ahead market, we have this component that is the greenhouse gas emission. That component, indeed, is part of the energy price for the CAISO balancing area. There are a few items to highlight here in this summary information. The first one is that the energy price tends to be higher, is the prime product that we procure in the market, is the energy that is going to incur the cost when we use the fuel. The other items, such as imbalance reserves and reliability capacity, are ancillary reserves that we need to have in the system. Expectedly, they are going to be valued less. We see that happening. A point to highlight here is that when you look at the summary for imbalance reserves, we have both directions, up and down. And you look at, on average, the prices, we are talking about $1 for the CAISO, as much as $7 for the Pacific Corporation West area. And I want to associate that with the concerns that were raised prior to go live. There was a lot of anxiety about the potential high prices for imbalance reserves based on the simulation data. We projected that this wouldn't realize given the fact that we were relying on simulated data. And now that we have actual information, I'm happy to report that these concerns didn't realize. We have seen very moderate prices for these new products. The second piece I would like to highlight is the price separation across the different balancing areas. And I have to say, price separation on its own is not bad or good. It's just a realization of the reality of the system. We have limited transmission capacity in certain areas of the system, and that is going to avoid fully utilization of the cheapest power wherever it is. So price separation indeed has the benefit to highlight where the bottlenecks are in the system. And we have seen that price separation happens across the three balancing areas of the extended day-ahead market, not only for energy, but also for imbalance reserves and for reliability capacity. And that is reflecting the regional dynamics and economics of the extended market footprint. Here we have an interesting trend. We have, for comparison, the month of April prior to the extended day-ahead market, and then we have the trends for May and June. June is a partial month, given the time when we created the material. And there are two trends here. The first one is that naturally we are moving into the summer conditions where system conditions start to go higher. Naturally, prices are going to tend to be higher. So when we compare April versus May, that increase is mainly due to the seasonal conditions where we move from the shoulder months into the summer. And the second component is the shape of the prices that reflect the supply conditions of the system. It's very typical for this time of the year to see low prices in the middle of the day, given the penetration of solar resources, and then having these higher prices both in the morning and evening peak when ramping needs are in place. And the price separation that happens across the three balancing areas of the system. When we talk about prices, one metric that we consistently look at is how well the markets are converging from day ahead to real time. This is a long-term metric, but still the first 2 months give us some insights how things are working out. The first month, in May, expectedly, we saw a lot of movements, mainly in the first 2 weeks of the month, and they settled down towards the end of May. We can see that the price separation, the distance between each bar, is getting closer from May to June as we get into a more stable condition of the market. That is a good signal that the market is getting that stable point after we pass this critical transitional period of the first days of May. Regarding the new market product, imbalance reserves, this is an explicit mechanism that now we have in the market to procure flexibility for the system needs for uncertainty. The requirements are going to be correspondingly equitable to the size of each balancing area. California, being the largest balancing area, is going to have the largest amount of requirements for imbalance reserves. We're talking about up to 3,500 megawatts for imbalance reserve up. Accordingly, PAC East and PAC West are going to have lower requirements given the size of their system. A feature to highlight here is the pattern of the requirements. We have the highest requirements for uncertainty, both in the morning and evening peak. The requirements are very low for the rest of the hours. When we look at the prices that we clear in the market, they follow the same trend. Prices are going to go up precisely when the needs are the greatest. And we have these prices also separating across the different balancing areas. Generally speaking, we have seen that the prices for the CAISO balancing area tend to be less than $5. There was some volatility experienced for Pacific West in the first 2 weeks of the month that raised the average price for the whole month. Next slide, please. An interesting fact that also has to do with the discussions that we have prior to go live regarding the configurable parameters is how we are going to procure for that flexibility. This is a snapshot of what generation mix is supporting the flexibility for each balancing area, specifically for the CAISO balancing area. This is the profile for the up and the down direction. In general, we can see that gas generation is providing a steady flexibility throughout the day, and we have solar and wind providing flexibility mainly during the solar hours of the day. The profile is slightly different when we look at for PAC East because their generation mix is mainly coming from coal complemented with transfers. Because one of the features that we have in the extended day-ahead market is that transfers can be utilized not only for moving energy, but also flexibility, imbalance reserves, and also reliability capacity. And when we look at PAC West, the majority of the flexibility is coming from hydro resources and also from transfers. The next feature that we have is the reliability capacity. This is a feature that we have in the market to ensure that based on the financial solution of the day-ahead market, we ensure that we have committed enough capacity to be able to meet our day-ahead forecast. The financial market is going to clear based on bidding demand, based on economics, and that clearing level may be different than the actual load forecast that we expect for next day. So the ROC process is going to true up that difference. Based on where we're clearing bidding demand in the financial market, we ramp up resources or ramp down resources to meet that load forecast. It has a specific profile for some of the balancing areas, specifically for the CAISO. We tend to see that there is procurement of downward capacity in the middle of the day when we have the solar penetration. For Pacific East, we tend to see that the reliability capacity tend to increase towards the peak of the day. And Pacific West seems to be a minor dynamic in the overall picture. Just to highlight the dynamics that we have seen for the transitional period, this is a good representation of how things come together and how the system has gotten more stable as we accrue more operational time. This is a representation of the reliability capacity prices for the three balancing areas. Granted that there are price differences, the main trend here is that you can see the volatility that was experienced in the first 2 weeks of the month. And in general, you're going to see that the first 2 weeks of May happen to be very dynamic, but things have gotten stable after that. And the most critical piece of the extended day ahead market is, with no doubt, the transfers. The transfers are the enabler for allowing economic displacement in the market footprint. They enable to move cheap generation from one balancing area to displace more expensive generation in other areas. And obviously, the transfer capability is going to dictate how much of that can be realized. We have seen very active action in the balancing, in the extended day ahead market across the 3 balancing areas in both directions. Each balancing area is leveraging on these transfers depending on the time of the day to bring energy or to send power out. It's very typical, for instance, for the CAISO balancing area to have excess of generation in the middle of the day when we have the highest penetration of solar supply. That is the precise time when we can leverage on the transfers to be able to trade that energy to other balancing areas. And correspondingly, that excess of energy is going to be taken by the corresponding PAC East and PAC West balancing areas. Finally, we understand the criticality to be transparent, to provide timely information. We understood the significance of this implementation of the extended day ahead market, and we were very deliberate to ensure that we took additional steps to provide that transparency and timely information. We introduced a new daily report that is publicly available, where participants can see across the extended market footprint how the market is performing. That became available with the launch of the day ahead market. During May, we also have 4 dedicated ad hoc participants call to go over all the insights that we have, to explain the different issues that we face and how we fixed those, including the items that were subject to price corrections. We also committed, and we have been doing that since May, to issue a monthly report followed by a monthly stakeholder call, where we basically assess the overall performance more holistically across the different components of the market. We ran the first stakeholder call back in June 2025, and now we're scheduled to have the second session on July 30th. And the companion is a dedicated report that has different metrics, different assessment of all the features of the market. And we have committed to continue to do this at least for the first 6 months of operation of the extended day ahead market. And in part of that is to leverage this effort to continue the discussion of the configurable parameters. That was our commitment, and we are just going through the process to meet that commitment. That's what I have for this update. Happy to take on any questions.
Thank you, Guillermo. Are there any comments or questions from the board or governing body members?
So if we can go back to slide 5, please. That one. So Guillermo, I'm curious about so the prices and remaining moderate and consistent. Is there a way to kind of look at, so what was the price in 2025? I'm looking to see, is the price actually lower than it otherwise might have been, trying to normalizing for weather, normalizing for gas prices? Is there a way to kind of look at compared to what? And I think I'm always looking for the compared to what. Is it better compared to what? So if you have a chance to maybe follow up with me on that, that'd be great.
Yes, I will happy to follow up on that. I can respond now. And it is always a little bit complicated to try to isolate all the factors that may impact the solution when we compare against a historical reference. We can normalize, we can try to isolate and the conditions to try to get this fair comparison. We have done a similar exercise using a different approach. And that approach is basically taking the current solution of the extended day ahead market, and we rerun without the EDAM feature. Effectively, we don't allow the transfers to realize and see what is the natural solution. We can also bring down the requirements of imbalance reserves to 0 just to see how much of that displacement happened. We have done that exercise, at least for the first days of May. In retrospective, we maybe should use other days because the first days of May were very dynamic. So we can reassess that exercise for now subsequent days that could be more stable to be able to gauge what is the difference between market and no market.
Other questions? I see, okay, Rob Kanziolka, please.
Thank you. Guillermo, as usual, excellent presentation, excellent coverage of this material. I know you could probably share a lot more with us, and there's only so much time. And I also want to thank Elliot and Mark and Anna for making certain that we get these market updates. This has been proving to be quite valuable, informative. Could we go to slide, Guillermo, slide 3, which is 33 on the master slides? And on this particular one, one is, I want to thank you for this graphic. I thought this was intriguing to be able to show the imbalance reserve up and down for the 3 BAs and in showing this. And I just hadn't seen something like this before. So I was fascinated by to see how it performed. And my question to you is on the takeaway. I noticed that the Cal ISO BA was fairly tight on the bandwidth and compared to the PAC East and West. And I just want to know, was there any takeaway from that? Is that just sort of the initial learning curves? Should we expect this type of view of the IRs up and down in the future, or is there any takeaways that you have from this?
Yes, I can elaborate on that. Just a clarification, they have different scales. Otherwise, if we use the same scale for all 3, PAC East and PAC West become very small. Now, granted the scale of the CAISO balancing area, the requirement seems to be relatively modest, and they are, because if we're talking about a peak of 30,000, the imbalance reserve requirements at most is 3,500 megawatts, about 10% of the requirements. I would say this is one of the key areas that we are further assessing. This only highlights what are the needs. And we have seen through the other metrics how we are meeting that need. The most intriguing part that we want to answer is, are we actually using it once we go into the real time? That was our commitment once we were operating in the market simulation environment, that once we have actual operation, we can really close the loop, because now we can see how it's been deployed and utilized in the real-time market. So I would say we are still working on that, and we are going to report on that in the subsequent sessions. But that would be the full picture to really assess the value of the imbalance reserves, how much we are using of that once we secure and procure that capacity.
Excellent, and thank you. Then I look forward to seeing that at the next presentation.
I believe Chair Edo has a question. Oh, actually, Governor Reynolds.
All right, I'm happy to go because my question relates to the same slide, slide 3. But first, I wanted to thank you for the presentation, Guillermo. It was really excellent and great to be here to hear about the success of the launch of EDAM and the continued positive results of the market and the implementation of the enhance of DAME as well. So my question, quick question on page 3, it shows, and you talked about the passing rate of the test, and that PAC West had a couple of hours where they didn't pass, which brought them down to the 99.4. Can you just say what that means? Because I think, there could be a range of, okay, they're short and there's actual load shed emergency conditions versus not passing the test, and what that means to not pass the test. If you could explain that, that would be great.
I don't remember specifically the day. It was one single day where PAC West didn't pass 7 hours of the upward test and 1 hour of the downward test. I would classify this to be more of a transitional setup that we have in the system. The capacity was there, but when we are assessing the resource efficiency evaluation, there is always this competing need. Do I move resources to meet my imbalance reserve up or my imbalance reserves down? So at that point, basically the setup that we have, somehow the downward direction have more priority, same priority as the upward direction. Granted, when you are assessing for the capacity needs, the upward direction tends to be more critical. You want to ensure that you have the supply available to move up. So after that event, we actually changed the configuration of the system to give more priority to the upward direction. And we were able to see that, yes, there were some variations after we implemented that enhancement. Granted, even if we have that enhancement in place in the first day, there would have been also some failures in the downward direction. And that is just a testament of the conditions that PAC was dealing with on those days. There were some transmission conditions, there were some real tightness in their area.
That's really helpful. So it didn't reflect a lack of sufficient resources. It had to do with the application of the test to measure conditions.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Edo?
Again, thank you, Guillermo. I really enjoy your presentations. I like this stuff. I have two questions. You talked about the things that weren't a surprise. This is what you expected, and this is what we got. Have there been any surprises? And which kind of surprises have they been?
Yeah, I think there may be two types of group of surprises. The first one is areas that we need to improve, that we have identified that didn't work well, and we have addressed many of those. Some of those impacted either the market application, the market solution, or the settlements. And we have been transparent what those issues are. We have discussed this with participants in either the settlements discussion, in the market analysis discussions. We have listed those issues. So is that completely surprising? Given the significance of the implementation and the impact that this has in so many different applications and systems, I would still classify that to be not such a surprise. It's bounded to happen. It's a matter of how fast we can react to address those. In terms of the market dynamics, how things are working, I would say the surprising thing would be how well it went. We were planning for the worst, and it actually happened to be better than expected.
Very good. Okay, so my second question is, one of the things I really like about when you talk about the update on EIM is you calculate what the benefits have been. And I know you have a methodology that has been developed with stakeholders for calculating the benefits of EDAM. When will you be bringing those results forward to us?
Yes, the timing for this briefing was too early, basically 1 week too early to have those values official. Right now, we have completed the methodology. We have done all the assessment that we could do to ensure the accuracy of the calculation. Right now, we are sharing the information with PAC to ensure that they have their own validation and we cross-check the numbers. We are expecting to publish the second quarter of both the WEIM report together with the EDAM report, and that is expected to come out on July 30th. We will have a section for the EDAM and the existing section for the real time.
Excellent. I'm really looking forward to that. Thank you.
Any further comments? But I see Chair Campbell has his.
Yeah, question. I appreciate Chair Edo's big picture questions. I have a small picture question maybe, but slide 8, which shows the different types of resources that are providing imbalance reserves. I think I had in my head that the sort of resources that would provide imbalance reserves are the traditional flexible resources like some gas plants and maybe hydro and batteries. That was interesting to see solar show up in such a big way. What does that kind of mean that a solar resource is providing imbalance reserves? Like what's going on there?
Yeah, one of the features that we have in our market is that we are technology agnostic. The same rules that apply for gas apply to renewable resources, granted the specific characteristics they may have. In the economic sense, they are able to participate in the market fully like any other conventional resource. Effectively, they put economic bids. They are expressing the price quantity for which they are able to move in the range. So in that sense, when the market decides that it needs to have schedules or redispatches to address either congestion or imbalance reserves, it makes no difference how those resources can be moved. Now, the practical implication is going to be that if we want a solar resource, for instance, to procure imbalance reserve, we need to ensure that it is dispatched in a way that it can create the room for that movement. But in the economic sense, there is no difference to any other type of technology.
Can I just add a little bit to that, please? So I think in the downward direction, I think it's fairly obvious that solar can provide downward flexibility effectively through its curtailment. I think the upward is a bit more confusing. And I think our upward capability is still limited by basically the forecast of that resource capability at that time. And so if you think about it, if a resource may be getting dispatched locally or downward for some other economic reason, it has now upward capability. And that's what I think you're seeing in the result here, is that it does have upward physical capability. In those cases where it has that either downward or upward capability relative to its forecast.
Okay. Any further comments? I see Severin has one.
I have a question on the same slide, and that's about storage. And the comment, which I think I understand what it's referring to, storage resources provide minimal capacity in peak hours. Peak hours here, well, maybe I should ask you, does that refer to 20 to 22, or does that refer to the middle of the day? It doesn't refer to hour 19, I assume, which is when they are actually, I would have thought of as a peak hour.
Yeah, when I refer to peak hours, I really mean the morning and the evening peak would be hour ending 7, 8, and 19.
Okay, I guess those 7, 8, and 9?
7 and 8 in the morning, and hour ending 19 in the evening. For this time of the year, we have the very typical load profile.
I'm sorry, I just have 19?
Hour ending 19.
But it is providing significant capacity in hour 19. Am I reading this wrong?
The storage resources color-coded with the dark blue.
They're the ends of the two.
Yes, it's at the ends of the two trends. Yes, they provide some capacity. The context is that my reference is what we saw in market simulation, where we saw storage resources basically dispatched for imbalance reserves across the hours of the day. Now, once we have actual information that is from production, we can see that it is very targeted. They are only providing imbalance reserves both in the morning and the evening peak. It's not in the sense that it's a small quantity for the peak, it's that through the day, it is only very concentrated in the peak hours.
Can I expand a little bit?
No, it's fine. It's just the sentence says storage resources provide minimal capacity.
I think he's saying relative to the other resources that are providing the service.
Yeah.
So I think that's the meaning of the comment. Is that correct? But the point I want to make is that storage during these times is going oftentimes, at least in the evening peak, is going to be providing energy already and is already scheduled to provide energy, or one of the other ancillary services. It's a significant provider of other ancillary services. So you add the imbalance reserve and you find it's a mix or a variety of resources providing the service, not maybe what you would expected that storage is a dominant provider of the new imbalance reserve service, but it's because it's providing other energy and reserve capability.
Okay, so, and is that the explanation for hours 20, 21, 22, where it's pretty much absent? That
I think at that point it's depleted.
Yeah, okay, fine. Thank you. Thank you, Guillermo.
I believe Governor Leslie had a question.
I'm just wondering, again, thank you for this whole overview. It's really interesting to see the difference in price over markets. And then on page 6, you show the way the market's been operating between April, May, and June. This one. And you talk about how over time, the price volatility became more optimal, function better price convergence. Now, do you assume that will continue?
That is the expectation. I think one of the features that we can argue during the transitional period is that all participants are figuring out how to participate in the new market. Naturally, there will be some exploration of how to bid, how to position resources. I think after we have seen the first weeks of operation in May, we expect to see now a more stable point where really the price convergence or divergence is going to be focusing more on the inherent features of the market rather than the familiarity or lack of familiarity of participants. I would expect that over time we see a better convergence, and we have been tracking that for the CAISO. And I can tell you that even for the CAISO that has been stable for so many years, there are cases where that convergence doesn't happen all the time. And we expect similar conditions to happen for the EDAM. Just the complexities of all the dynamics of the real-time market tends to sometimes create this potential divergence relative to the day ahead.
Can you please get a little closer to the microphone? I think they're having trouble hearing you.
Yes, I heard. So the comment is whether this is driven by some system conditions or dynamics. I would say it's all of the conditions that could happen. My point is that during the transitional period of May, there are a lot of factors related to the implementation, to the familiarity of the participants that could reflect on the price convergence. Once these items are settled down and they are no longer an issue, the divergence or convergence we're going to see is going to be reflected of the inherent characteristics of the market. And that is when the interesting part starts, because we have to figure out why there may be some chronic divergence in some cases. And my reference is the CAISO historically. Most of the time we have a good convergence, but there are months where things just happen to be so dynamic that the divergence still happens.
Okay. Any further board or governing body comments, questions? I seeing none. Okay. The next item is to see whether there's any public comment on this agenda item. There are no public comments in the queue, no public comments in the room. So Silas, if you could check to see if there's any online.
If you'd like to make a public comment, you can press the raise hand icon on Zoom or #2 on the phone.
Okay.
No comments in the queue.
Thank you. Seeing no comments, I believe we might want to take a 5-minute break, just for people to have a chance to stretch their legs before we go on to the next agenda items, which are somewhat lengthy. So let's do that. Okay, I believe we're going to get started again, and we'll move on to our next agenda item, agenda item 6, briefing on Spotlight Initiative, demand and distributed energy market integration. I believe that Vice President Anna McKenna, VP of Market Design and Analysis, will introduce the topic.
Thank you, Bert. And good afternoon again, everyone. I have the pleasure of introducing this next briefing. This is a spotlight briefing that we started doing a while ago, and I'm finding to be very helpful both for ourselves and I hope for you as well. Today's spotlight briefing will be focused on the Demand and Distributed Energy Market Integration Initiative that's currently underway and been going on for some time now. And I have the great pleasure of introducing to you Anya Gilbert, Policy Development Manager, who's going to lead this conversation. And with that, I will turn it over to Anya.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Anna, and good afternoon, governing body and Board of Governors. Can we move to the next slide? Before getting into the proposal, I thought it would help to set the stage with the broader landscape and discuss how stakeholders helped shape our 2026 scope or our Demand and Distributed Energy Market Integration Initiative, which we lovingly refer to as DDEMI. Just from a landscape perspective, with electrification, large load, extreme weather events, and the proliferation of distributed energy resources, including proliferation of behind-the-meter batteries particularly, that can create grid challenges for the CAISO or opportunities. And I think particular if we look at the proliferation of behind-the-meter batteries, if you look at California as just one case study, there are 3 gigawatts of behind-the-meter batteries deployed in the state. From the ISO's kind of demand flexibility strategy perspective, we're really looking to ensure that we can harness this demand flexibility reliably and economically into our grid operations and into our market efficiently through the optimization. The 4 work streams that you see here really emerged from our DDEMI working group process, where stakeholders came to us and shared what enhancements they would recommend the CAISO make to better reflect demand flexibility into our market. They came forward with 31 problem statements, and this is a prioritized list of near-term enhancements that we could make in the short term based on that working group feedback and expert feedback. DDEMI as a whole is looking at assessing how our market needs to evolve to better capture this demand flexibility. So the 4 topics here each address different aspects of answering that question. Our focus in today's spotlight briefing is on the first highlighted box, which we refer to as track 1 for end user exports in demand response performance measurement. What this means in practice is we are looking to allow individual customers within a demand response aggregation to export, so long as the overall aggregation does not export. So it preserves the existing demand response construct. In track 2, we're taking on kind of the second and third bullets here, really looking to update our market models for demand flexibility to better reflect our Western energy imbalance and extended day-ahead market balancing authority area participants, including the possible consideration of a reliability-triggered demand response product. We're also taking large load head-on and exploring if we need to make changes to better accommodate large load, either as supply or to the extent that it has flexible demand on the supply side. We're also looking to have a working group this year to better explore and articulate some of the benefits that could emerge from real-time demand side and pumped load bidding. So we are focusing in on this first highlighted box. Let me first turn things over to Ali Mace to talk about the stakeholder process with DDEMI Track 1.
Thank you, Anya. Good afternoon. As Anya shared, the DDEMI initiative is important to many stakeholders in the West to unlock the potential of demand and distributed energy resources. So I want to provide a snapshot of stakeholder participation in Track 1 of the DDEMI initiative, since that's where we'll be focusing the spotlight today. So this track of the initiative launched just in March of this year with the release of a straw proposal and issue paper. The meeting was held to discuss these documents and drew 111 attendees. We also received 23 sets of comments on the paper. It's quite a lot of engagement on that. In June, we released a revised straw proposal, and that incorporated feedback from the first straw proposal and held a meeting to review that, which was attended by 101 stakeholders and received 15 sets of comments providing feedback. Finally, just last week, we released the draft final proposal and held a meeting attended by 80 stakeholders, and the comment period on that draft final proposal is currently open through tomorrow. As you can tell from the high participation numbers, stakeholder input has really been key to advancing Track 1 of the initiative, and we appreciate the thoughtful engagement of so many stakeholders. Today, in addition to Anya's spotlight briefing, we have invited 4 stakeholders to share their perspectives on the Track 1 proposal, including representatives from different sectors and different parts of the region. Anya will introduce the stakeholder presenters following her briefing on the proposal. We appreciate the time and effort of each of our presenters who are joining us here today. So with that, I will hand it back to Anya to provide the spotlight briefing and then introduce the stakeholders.
Thank you, Ali. So to drill into what we are proposing in Track 1, it's really allowing the performance of a demand response aggregation to allow for the inclusion of behind-the-meter customer exports, so long as that customer is authorized to export by their utility distribution company. So they would have an interconnection agreement that allows for that export. And we are also allowing them to export so long as the entire aggregation doesn't export. And this really is intended to enable kind of the capturing of some of the behind-the-meter demand flexibility in the energy market during periods of grid stress. Next slide. Before going too much further, I do want to review some of the terms that are central to understanding the proposal and how they relate to each other. What I want you to take away from this slide is that one demand response resource or aggregation is made up of many end users or customers. So when you hear end user, it's really synonymous with a retail customer, a site, a location, a service account, or end use customer. Whereas when we talk about resource, that could be the demand response aggregation. It could be one of our demand response market models like our proxy demand resource aggregation, reliability demand response resource aggregation. And so again, the takeaway is one demand response resource is made up of many end users or customers. Next slide. Moving on to measurement, demand response is measured relative to what a customer otherwise would have done. And this demand response still relies on accurate metering of the demand response resource to determine how much load is reduced during a dispatch event and compared to what they would have otherwise done. So the meter data from their dispatch event feeds into what we refer to as the demand response energy measurement. Sometimes we call it the DREM for short, which calculates the load reduction by comparing what was the load during dispatch to what was their typical use or what was their baseline. And governing this calculation is the performance evaluation methodology, which is a combination of metering and baseline practices, but it governs how the comparison is performed to make sure that there's consistency and accuracy in that calculation. So these different elements together establish our framework for quantifying, validating, and settling the demand response to make sure that we're getting the incremental performance and we're not paying for typical behavior. And this ultimately links real-time customer load behavior to market participation and compensation. I do want to note that because this proposal does look at enabling end user exports, we are also asking and requiring that the baseline data include typical export behavior, again, so that we're only compensating for what's incremental as compared to typical behavior. Next slide. So this slide illustrates how exports are handled today under demand response. So even if we have a customer that's authorized to export by their utility distribution company and does, when it comes to the demand response measurement calculation, those exports are zeroed out. And on this slide, we see that customers 3 and 4 each have 3 kilowatts of export. But when that scheduling coordinator looks to calculate what the demand response energy measurement is, they're zeroing out customer 3 and 4's net exports at the customer level. This also means that incremental performance cannot be measured. Next slide. Track 1 proposes to change the measurement approach. So instead of zeroing out customer level exports, we'd be recognizing those exports so long as the overall aggregation doesn't export. So while we're not exporting out, while we're not zeroing out customers 3 and 4, ultimately the resource is still capped at their load, which is 8 megawatts. Next slide. I will note that some stakeholders would like the ISO to go further. This wasn't a proposal that was just introduced in the CAISO's processes. It was introduced in the load shift working group at the CPUC. In 2023, the CPUC's energy division had a proposal for modified PDR that would allow for PDR to export up to the sublap. Industry stakeholders then submitted a similar proposal into the CAISO stakeholder catalog process in 2024. And those proposals really allowed export beyond the resource ID. This slide is meant to explain why we are not looking at this time at allowing for exports beyond that resource ID level, and why track 1 at this time is stopping at the resource level. From a market-wide perspective, it's important to understand how demand response is modeled. We model demand response at a sublap, a geographic region, to help ensure that demand response, it doesn't produce congestion and that congestion is modeled accurately. So for example, in the state of California, there are 24 sublaps that represent transmission constrained areas. And we model it at that sublap and then allocate down using load distribution factors, the assumptions around where that load might materialize on the system. If you start allowing for net injections, it can create a discrepancy in terms of these modeling approaches, in terms of what's happening at the P node level versus what's actually happening. And so exports beyond the resource ID would require additional policy discussions and modeling discussions to have more precise modeling of where these injections were to occur. Absent any changes, if we were to allow exports beyond the resource ID, there could be impacts in terms of a discrepancy of what is in kind of the current power flow modeling. It could create congestion, and it could also impact locational pricing. So for those reasons, at this time, Track 1 isn't looking to export beyond the resource ID or resource aggregation level. And then there are also ISO BAA deliverability and resource adequacy considerations. In California, in order for a resource to be considered RA, it needs to be deliverable, and deliverability is both finite and shared. And for a resource to export beyond its own resource ID can take deliverability away from other resources. And in that regard, from a CAISO BAA perspective, an exporting demand response resource would really need nodal deliverability studies so that we know what is happening at each individual location, appropriate resource modeling so that the market model knows what's happening at each of those individual locations, and transmission planning, deliverability, allocation. So the takeaway I hope you have from this slide is that really we're not saying no to net exports, but based on the small incremental reforms we're looking at in Track 1, it would require much larger discussions in DDEMI for kind of looking at the market-wide policy across all BAAs in terms of the policy implications, network modeling implications, resource modeling implications, and at the CAISO BAA level, transmission planning processes for deliverability and the RA implications. Next slide. So in summary, the proposal itself allows for export authorized customers only to contribute their actual performance to demand response measurement while maintaining demand response as a load curtailment product. We do see some benefits in terms of the improved recognition of distributed energy resources. It's consistent with existing frameworks, and it's maintaining performance-based compensation. There's also safeguards in place in that these resources must be least cost in order to receive an award from CAISO. DR is also unique in that it must bid in accordance with the net benefits test to ensure there's a net benefit of dispatching that resource to the market. If they are resource adequacy in the CAISO BAA, they still must adhere to the CAISO BAA's resource adequacy requirements, which includes a must offer obligation and availability incentive mechanisms like the resource adequacy availability incentive mechanism, which is both a reward and a penalty for that availability. And to the extent they are awarded and they do not respond, they're subject to uninstructed imbalance energy charges, or essentially the real-time price for saying they would be available when they are not. So I did want to include those safeguards. Maybe we can move to the next slide. Rather than just hearing from the ISO's perspective, we also wanted to use the remainder of the time to hear from some stakeholders that have been actively engaged in our DDEMI initiative. And they bring different perspectives to this initiative. So you will hear perspectives both on Track 1 and some of the broader opportunity around demand flexibility in the West and some of the topics we're addressing in Track 2. So we're going to hear from Andrew Hoffman from LEAP, James Weir from Pacific Gas and Electric, Jennifer Bach from CalCCA, Carrie Schlachter from Black Hills Energy. And I really want to thank each of our presenters for joining us today and for their engagement throughout the DDEMI stakeholder process. With that, I'll invite Andrew up to come join us.
Push the push button. I want to thank you all very much for having me, board and governing body. I also appreciate the opportunity to wear some Aloha wear, so thank you for that. As I was driving from Marin County, and it was over 100, and I saw peak demand, gross peak demand today, over 43 gigawatts. I thought that it was probably a good thing for us to be mindful of the day as well. And LEAP, I'll get into a little bit more about LEAP, but we've got megawatts active today in a day that is one of it's probably the highest peak day we've had so far this summer. But I was just checking the ISO pricing, and pricing is below $60, at least in the present. And so I think we've been working strategically to be prepared for times like this. And I'm excited about what we're talking about today because I think it's a further step in us preparing strategically to make sure that we have sufficient resources and taking advantage of new technologies to be able to make sure our system stays robust and uses the best of technology going forward. So we can go to the next slide. As I mentioned, as Anya mentioned, my name is Andrew Hoffman. I'm the Chief Development Officer at LEAP. A little bit about LEAP. We are a demand response provider and a scheduling coordinator in the California ISO. We set out at LEAP not to be a traditional DR aggregator recruiting customers. I'm sorry, I feel like my volume goes up and down. Not to go out and recruit individual end-use customers, but to say we need to provide technology that works with leading distributed energy resource companies to make it easy for them to bring their technologies into the market. So as you all are probably pretty aware, the complexities of building aggregations of customers, of enrolling them in markets, of understanding all the nuances of market rules, of data collection and settlement, baselines are quite complicated, is a hindrance to folks who would like to go out and build the next great battery or build electric vehicles or have smart thermostats and building management systems. And LEAP said, if we could provide a technology platform to make that easy, we would bring a lot more flexibility into the markets. And so that's what LEAP set out to do. And we're a scheduling coordinator in CAISO and in most of the major markets in the US. Batteries are, of course, one of the most important and flexible assets that we have and one of the fastest growing. But in the California ISO wholesale market to date, we've been underutilizing the asset. So we can go to the next slide. So batteries have historically been limited at an individual site basis to not export. And so that has led pragmatically to a derate to nominations, which is a term for the stated capability of a resource of over 70%. Because a battery can generally export from at least 4 kW, and if you've got multiple batteries, you can go up to maybe 10. Load during the peak periods, oftentimes 1 or 2 kilowatts, or if you're a solar and storage resource, it might actually be 0 because you're already exporting. And so batteries have, by and large, sat out the wholesale market to date. They've had to derate their nominations significantly. I'm talking about behind the meter batteries specifically, not front of the meter, just to be clear on that. But just in residential, we have 2 gigawatts installed. As Anya mentioned, we have 3 gigawatts if you include commercial behind the meter storage as well. So it's a multi-gigawatt resource. Just looking at numbers from 2023, there were less than 10 megawatts in the dozens of megawatts that were participating in third-party CAISO integrated programs. And then as another data point recently, the California Energy Commission's Demand Side Grid Support Program, or DSGS program, was able to recruit 700 megawatts or over 700 megawatts of battery participation in a couple years. The opportunity is real. The batteries are there. They're both hundreds of megawatts of them installed, gigawatts of them installed today, and they're being installed increasingly at an increasing clip as we move forward in time. And so some of the factors in the state are concerning for the use of this resource. There's been funding uncertainty for the Demand Side Grid Support Program going forward. And in general, we would love to see, and this is LEAP's perspective, we would love to see all those resources bid into the markets. That we want to see them visible in the market. We want to see them dispatched and awarded economically. We think that the system works better and most efficiently that way. So next slide, please. And so we think battery-based virtual power plants, or VPPs, are one of the latent resources that we could tap much better in the system today. As I mentioned, it would make the system more efficient. It would bring least cost resources to bear. It would make better use of installed capacity that customers have already invested in. It's a 3 gigawatt opportunity. Just with LEAP and our partner model, we have over 200 megawatts in our pipeline that we look forward to bringing as soon as we can get this approved. And then, of course, we're not the only player in the space. There are a number of other ones as well. The proposal is an accounting change. It's not a market redesign. Anya was discussing how the resource would still have to stay a net consumer of electricity, so it doesn't involve having to change the definition of demand response. Personally, I would love to see us actually allow for exports at a broader level, up to the sublap level or beyond. I think that when the system is crying for resources, if the price is $700 a megawatt hour, I think we should try to harness all resources that we can. So I look forward to future tracks, track 2, et cetera, to try to explore those more. But I think track 1 is a meaningful step that's going to unlock capacity. The other thing I would say, just in meeting the times that we're in right now, many ISOs and RTOs would give their eye teeth if they could unlock a couple gigawatts of capacity right now. If you take a look at PJM, where they have a over 10 gigawatt shortfall and they're running a reliability backstop procurement, and MISO and other places that are hungering to interconnect large loads, they would love to have this resource. So this feels like a really meaningful step to unlock growth in California and the West. It doesn't require the development of new assets or interconnection of new assets. It's making better use of what we have so far. So on behalf of LEAP and our partners, we're really strong supporters of this. We've been involved in putting this on the radar and in bringing support. And we're really hopeful that this will be available as soon as it can be, hopefully for 2027, to bring additional flexible capacity to bear.
Thank you, Andrew. Let's now move to James Weir's presentation from Pacific Gas and Electric.
Okay, good afternoon, Board of Governors and members of the WM governing body. My name is James Weir. I'm an expert program manager in PG&E's demand response team. And here in the room with me, I also have Abby Nguyen, manager of demand response programs, and Luke Nickerman, who is the manager of load management strategy and policy. So in my role, I focus on the CAISO market integration of PG&E's demand response resources and have been participating in the DDEME initiative since its inception. So I really appreciate this opportunity to present PG&E's perspective on the Track 1 proposal. So PG&E supports the proposal. It is a pragmatic, incremental step that unlocks more value from customer-sited distributed energy resources, and it advances a broader vision for virtual power plants. PG&E notes the potential for double compensation from customers on net energy metering and net billing tariff, who also participate in the exporting demand response model. More about that in a moment. But so PG&E recognizes that the behind-the-meter distributed energy resources, batteries today, and vehicle-to-grid, and other technologies, possibly as EV technology advances. But these are really the building blocks of the virtual power plants. And the Track 1 proposal creates a scalable participation pathway that dispatches flexible behind-the-meter resources precisely when they deliver the greatest system value, when the demand response resource receives the market awards. So currently, behind-the-meter distributed energy resources provide exports across a broad time frame that's more based on the retail tariff time of use rates. However, this often does not correspond to the hours and locations when conditions are stressed and grid needs are the greatest. And these would be the times when the exported energy would be most valuable to the market. So the DDEME proposal provides the incentive for the exports exactly in the most valuable hours and locations, as represented by market awards for the demand response resources that are participating in the CAISO energy market. In addition, the DDEME proposal builds on the established proxy demand resource and reliability demand response resource models to make the greatest contribution with ease of implementation. Overall, the DDEMI proposal advances PG&E's key long-term objective of integrating customer-sited distributed energy resources more effectively into market operations and grid management. Next slide, please. However, PG&E believes the potential exists for double compensation and should be addressed collaboratively with the CPUC and CAISO. So the prevention of double compensation is a foundational pillar of affordability and a core tenet of customer program design. So under the DDEMI proposal, a customer's increased exports in response to a market award would receive compensation from the market for that incremental response. However, that same incremental response is already compensated under the existing retail tariff, whether that was a net energy metering or the net billing tariff. Net energy metering provides the full tariff compensation for the export, whereas net billing tariff values exports using the avoided cost components. So in PG&E's view, absent a safeguard, the same exported kilowatt hour could be paid again through CAISO market participation, while it's also receiving that retail tariff compensation. And so it could represent a duplicate payment for the same underlying grid value. So even though the compensation structures and price signals are different between the market award and the retail tariff, the same energy could be compensated twice in PG&E's view. PG&E recommends that net energy metering and net billing tariff participation is conditioned on a CPUC-aligned safeguards that prevent duplicate compensation for the same exported energy value. Implementation should be coordinated with the CPUC jurisdictional tariff or program changes to enable RA credit and to address double compensation concerns with these customers. So to close, PG&E really does support this proposal and the vision behind it, and sees it as a really smart, incremental step that brings more distributed flexibility into the market and lays the groundwork for virtual power plants at scale. PG&E is committed to supporting future collaborative efforts to advance both the grid value and the customer affordability. PG&E thanks CAISO and the stakeholder community for the great work on this initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. And now let's turn to Jennifer Bach with CalCCA.
Thank you, Anya, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Bach. I'm a Senior Distribution Case Manager for CalCCA, and I would acknowledge we have a couple other CCA folks, CalCCA folks on the call. You already heard from Evie Call, our Chief Policy Officer and General Counsel, and also Lauren Carr is on the webinar as well. She's our Deputy Director of Regulatory Affairs. Let's go to the next slide. For those of you who are not familiar who CalCCA is, we are an organization that represents 24 community choice aggregators, or CCAs, across California. And combined, those CCAs serve roughly 1/3 of the California ISO load. And they serve over 15 million customers in the state of California. So this is a significant portion of the state's load that is being served by CCAs. And as CCAs continue to grow and flourish, they continue to offer industry-leading programs, pilots, and projects. And what you see on this slide here is just a few of those programs offered by some of our CCAs throughout the state. And many of these programs are focusing on distributed energy resources and virtual power plants. And largely, the CCAs see these DERs as resources to help them reduce costs for their customers, also procurement costs, resource adequacy costs, hopefully, eventually, but also to achieve some of their climate objectives and electrification goals. And several of the CCAs have actually launched DER management systems or DERMS platforms to allow them to directly manage and control customer-owned behind-the-meter resources, such as would be eligible to participate in this program. Next slide, please. CalCCA supports Track 1 and believes it is a meaningful step forward for unlocking additional DER. Under the current structure, as Anya has described, all of these behind-the-meter storage resources are not able to get value for exporting, or not able to export. And so you have a lot of unused capacity in batteries and energy storage and electric vehicles that could be tapped to help better leverage existing system flexibility on the CAISO system. And this proposal, we believe, also reduces the barriers for demand flexibility participation and expands the pool of dependable and price-responsive capacity on the CAISO system. And CalCCA is supporting this proposal and recommending that the CAISO advance this for implementation in 2027 as proposed by staff. Next slide, please. Now, while this proposal doesn't resolve all of the issues and it doesn't address broader participation, we do think that this is a very important and meaningful first step in that direction. And we look forward to continued participation in other DDEMI tracks, some of which Anya has alluded to, that we hope to resolve some of the larger issues of being able to export beyond the resource ID. We're also engaged with the California Public Utilities Commission and the CAISO efforts on the transmission system and distribution system coordination to ensure that the CAISO has the appropriate visibility into these resources and ensure optimization of these resources across both the transmission and distribution system. And we're engaged in the high DER proceeding, and one of the issues in that proceeding is really focusing on DER orchestration. And we're a proponent of demand flexibility markets that we feel would enhance and increase significantly the amount of participation of behind-the-meter resources, both for wholesale market, but also for the distribution market, so that we can better optimize existing capacity on the distribution grid and avoid unnecessary infrastructure upgrades. We're also engaged in the resource adequacy proceeding at the PUC, and that we see as very complementary to these future efforts to ensure that these resources are given compensation for resource adequacy that they're providing on the wholesale market. And we continue to engage in these proceedings and continue to engage with the DDEMI stakeholder initiative. And I also want to just take this moment to just express our appreciation for the CAISO staff, for Anya and Ansel and Juan and Brenda and Ali and the rest of the team for shepherding this proposal through. We really think they've done a fantastic job in gathering the stakeholders together, listening to all of the concerns and crafting a proposal that integrates a lot of these concerns and addresses a lot of the stakeholder comments. And so we really appreciate their efforts in getting this through and doing so in very short order. So we're looking forward to continuing that relationship. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. And now let's turn things over to Carrie.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you
Okay,
and see you.
great. I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of technology problems. My name is Carrie Schlechter. I'm with Black Hills Energy. Thank you so much for having me and inviting me to present today. I am going to talk a little bit about why Black Hills is interested in this DDEMI work group, and mostly that pertains to our large loads and reliability. Next slide, please. So this is who we are. We have a large footprint of natural gas and electric utility. Our electric portion is at orange and also the orange and blue diagonal stripes there in Cheyenne, Wyoming. So we cover South Dakota, Wyoming, and a utility in Colorado as well. Next slide. Largely how we got involved in the DDEMI is because of our data center growth. So on our Cheyenne, Wyoming utility, that's Cheyenne Light Fuel and Power, we have two flexible service models for large load growth, and those flexibilities offer us to contract with market energy, contracted resources, and utility-owned resources. And to our surprise, that has translated to a lot of those fitting into the demand response products in the CAISO market. I'll be talking about kind of two separate types of customers and how they fit into this demand response product. And when I talk about those two types, I'll talk about them in a BCIS, which is blockchain interruptible service, and LPCS, which is our large power customer service. Our blockchain interruptible service, those are truly just Connex boxes in Wyoming full of computers that are willing to participate in market based upon economics only. And then our large power customer service, those are going to be your traditional data centers and the hyperscalers, and those contracts and the way those show up are different for every single customer. To kind of give you an idea of what we're seeing and how we're rapidly drinking from a fire hose and trying to work with CAISO to help us solve this, our Cheyenne Light Fuel and Power peak load has historically been around 300 megawatts. And as everyone knows, that took us about 65 years to get there. We are adding 600 megawatts by 2030, and we have 2.5 gigawatts in progress, and then unlimited in the pipeline. At this time, we are serving a couple data centers in their phase one. So there's different phases of each of the data center campuses as they build out. And we've been doing that for 10 years. But historically, we weren't in the CAISO market. So the way that we served those and registered in the market was much differently. Another thing to note as we work through this is that each campus is engineered differently. So some of them strictly have behind the meter generation that is purely for reliability purposes. And some of them have behind the meter generation proposals that are a huge mix of gas, solar, wind. Some are push-pull, so some can export to the grid, and some are only consumption. So it's unique that we have to find a solution for each of those engineered campuses to fit into the demand response products and market products that exist today. Next slide, please. So one really interesting concept for us that thank you, Anja and Ali and Juan for getting us involved in is the RDRR, the Reliability Demand Response Resource. So it's my understanding that today that's only used in the CAISO Balancing Authority, and we were interested in expanding that into other balancing authorities. Our large power customer service tariff, those customers bring a pretty significant behind the meter setup of backup generation, and most of those look like diesel or small natural gas units, and they are truly meant for reliability only. They are not market products per se on an economic way. And so we've been unsuccessful so far to convince some of these data center customers to allow us to represent that in the market. And their concerns were that it would be dispatched when, it wasn't specific to their load. And so what we found interesting about the RDRR product was that it is BA specific, BA control, and you can really establish a lot of reliability parameters. So a use case we see in that is saying, hey, X customer, if you allow us to register all of this behind the meter gas or diesel as a reliability only product that we will only represent in the market when we are in an EEA scenario or we are truly getting ready to flip your breakers and turn your lights off, that maybe they would be a little bit more open to allowing that generation to be represented. Again, we have no commitments to that today. We're still trying to work through the design of that and how that may apply to those customers. And then on the economic side, we are currently using this in the EIM today, and it's an incredible product. The NGRs, so non-generating resources, and we utilize that for our BCIS tariff, the blockchain interruptible service tariff. And what we've found is that while this product is truly an economic product and it's meant strictly for economic bids. So the blockchain customers say we only want to consume energy when prices are under X amount of dollars, and that's the way that we bid them into the market. We've found at a balancing authority level that these are exceptional for us and for reliability as well. And that's because they automatically reduce consumption when prices are high, which correlates with large loads or high loads. And so they assist with load shaving during high load and high pricing scenarios. They're price sensitive and very curtailable. And they also are allowed to be used for regulation and reserve purposes as well. And so that was kind of what brought us to this DDEMI group initially. And then obviously we've moved on to more reliability-based products as well. Next slide. We have been working pretty extensively with the CAISO team here to understand what these future hyperscale data centers are going to look like in these markets, because we're not talking about aggregating kilowatts at a time. We're talking about gigawatts worth of generation and co-location of mixed fuel. So again, like I said, there could be a gas generator with a battery and a wind farm, and all of those are technically behind the meter. And so how do you represent those accurately and bid them in to represent them in the best way? We're interested in push-pull options, so options that could fit those scenarios where they are consuming energy in some scenarios and pushing energy in other scenarios. And so again, like what product and how do you represent that? Some of our customers are interested in not participating in the market. Some of our customers want opt-out options. And so what does that look like? What would be the requirements of registration? And then we're just consistently communicating to CAISO the different types of campus configurations that we're seeing on an engineering side, so that those considerations can be worked through and tracked to when we see these different setups come in. And that's really all I have from the Black Hills perspective. And I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you, Carrie. Wow, from 300 megawatts to 3+ gigawatts, a really compelling story. All right,
It's significant.
Bruce.
Okay, thank you for those presentations. Board and governing body members, are there any questions or comments? I see one from Rebecca.
Let's go. Thank you for all the presentations. This is hugely fascinating and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. But in the PG&E presentation, there was reference to the PG&E's recommendation that around preventing double compensation. And I was trying to work through policy-wise where that would happen. Would that be on the CPUC side? Because I'm not seeing how that would work on the ISO side. So if the representative from PG&E is still around, maybe he could walk me through what they're envisioning as that safeguard.
Yes, great. Thank you for the question. Yes, so we feel that this would probably need most effort on the CPUC side, and so collaboration with the CAISO, say on an implementation type scheduling. But the CPUC, has recently started a new order instituting rulemaking for the enhanced demand response, and then also in their RA proceeding. And there's also the possibility of another proceeding that would consider the successor to the net billing tariff. So we're thinking that, in coordination with these different proceedings, this possibility could be addressed and, and done so in such a way that would not prevent, the DDEMI proposal from going forward at this time.
Okay, that you followed up with my question is that that actually sounds like a daunting path forward. So just trying to balance out what that path looks like versus where we're headed with DDEMI. And so question back to the ISO, what's the timeline for track 1 coming to, and do we know the classification, whether it's governing body or board, or what the classification is?
Yes, we are looking at it potentially coming as early as August to the board, to the Western Energy Markets governing body. Recognizing that this applies to all BAAs.
I actually think Severn had a question, and then after that, Deborah.
Yeah, this is a subject very close to my heart for the last 25 years. And I have to start by saying a year ago, the CAISO had a one-day conference on demand flexibility. I'm a huge fan of demand flexibility and think we do a very poor job of capturing it in useful ways. But one of the things that I thought came out, and it was Chatham House rules, so I'm not going to quote anybody, was pretty widespread agreement that paying demand as a supply resource was not going to go well, and that we needed to move towards treating demand as demand. And this is, unfortunately, although I think the track 1 I have no problem with, I think it's fine. But I am very worried that we are headed down a road of locking in bad policy that firms will make investments around and will be very hard to correct later. So I want to sort of put that out as a concern that we need to be thinking about all the ways in which these rules can be gamed and in which firms are profiting. Anya, you said we talked to a lot of people and asked for input on problems. I suspect you got almost all of your input from DR suppliers and not from all the other, for instance, consumer advocates who worry that this actually is paying for things that are not actually appearing. And I want to put in a word for them because I am concerned about that. We're going to run out of time. I will just note a few things that I would love to see addressed. One is CAISO has 10 different baseline formulae. One of them is a matched comparison group that I think any statistician would agree is the best way to infer the counterfactual usage. No DR provider has ever selected that. My understanding is that worries me, and I would be very interested in knowing how much higher baselines are based on the selected baselines rather than what I would consider a much more accurate baseline. I am concerned that we are locking in an asymmetric pricing schedule where you get paid for reducing your demand, but if you fail to reduce your demand, you actually just get charged the regular old retail price which we know during these events is too low, on increases in demand. So I think we really need to address the asymmetry in the pricing if we're going to treat demand as supply. I'm actually less worried about the double compensation issue because I think my experience with the avoided cost calculator, which is based on a forward-looking hourly forecast, is at least the data set I had from a couple of years ago peaks at somewhere in the range of 9 cents or $90 per megawatt hour. And during the events, the price is much higher than that. And so, yes, you're saving, you're getting paid that, and you're getting paid for the demand response. But I think that that's a problem. That's probably not a first order problem. And then I'll just close. I have a lot more comments, but I won't chew up all the time. I've forgotten her name. Our friend from Black Hills said that some customers want opt-out options. And that gets back to this idea that, you know, for most customers, we're offering a full requirements contract that you sign up and whatever you want, you get it at the retail price, which has been set months in advance. And they would like to have that even during these events, including, I presume, some of their large LPCS customers. And we actually have experience with that in the Polar and the provider of last resort auctions, because that actually is the equivalent of an opt-out where you're saying that you are signing up for coverage during those worst case events. And those Polar contracts are incredibly expensive. And they're incredibly expensive because they are they are expose the supplier to very high quantities when price is very high. And so, and I worry that where we're headed is sort of paying in or allowing people to opt into that by opting out of the DR program, which is an incredibly valuable option to have. And the suppliers of that in the Polar auctions charge a huge amount for that. So I have no problem with track one. I think track one is sort of within aggregation, makes a lot of sense. But I am very worried about where this is moving more generally without addressing the fundamental problem of paying for demand reduction when we really aren't doing baselines correctly and we have this asymmetric pricing schedule.
I appreciate that feedback. I don't know what to tackle first there from that long list.
And you know, we're behind schedule already, and I'm not expecting you or Andrew or anyone else to answer all these, but I would like to be part of the conversation. Yes. And I want to say that I'm not on board with the sort of general idea that we should create the huge demand response payment structure until we can really sort out some of these issues that I think could lead us down a road of locking in policy that we will really regret later on.
Baselines are an art and a science and more to come there, but I would invite you to participate in our Q3 working group, maybe as an expert speaker on real-time demand participation and real-time pump load bidding. So I think that'll be a fun discussion and I hope to see you there.
It looks like
somebody might have been before me. I think you were. Go ahead. No, please go.
Sorry, I had a quick response as well to that one, if that's possible before we move on. So just quickly, just on the record, that scheduling coordinators are on the hook for uninstructed energy in the event that they underperform. So the retail customers that are not performing are having to consume at the retail rate and pay for that. And then the scheduling coordinator does have to pay back the market for the uninstructed energy, and the price can go as high as the price goes. So that is. I thought you said something differently. I just wanted to say the scheduling coordinator does have to pay back at the real time price, and if it's at the market cap, then they're hemorrhaging money on that. So there is a symmetric risk there, I think.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and I'd like to discuss that further. That generally doesn't go down to the retail customer. And when the scheduling coordinator is an IOU, for instance, I guess I'm not 100% convinced that that sets up good incentives still.
Okay. Got it. Yeah. And then the other thing I was just going to mention briefly was that, and Anya talked about this, but the baselines are thoughtful in trying to make sure that there's additionality or incrementality to the performance. And so capturing exports as part of the regular baseline behavior, and the CAISO making that very clear that that's part of it, I think is taking care to try to make sure that on an actual ISO dispatch that there is incremental performance as compared to the baseline period, meaning that it's actually paying for performance above and beyond what the normal operating behavior was of the battery. So it feels like you all have taken a stab at trying to address those and making sure that you're getting, if there is going to be an energy market payment, it's for incremental performance and additional performance beyond what was in the baseline period.
And I just want to say that I have been asking for the last month for studies that actually do this counterfactual comparison, and no one has shown me one yet. I would love to see one. It seems pretty straightforward to calculate given the data that CAISO has, and I would love to see that comparison. As an economist, I sort of infer if a customer is choosing not to use the matched comparison group, it's because they're financially better off. And I think that that comports with it not being an accurate baseline.
I believe there may be one or more other Board of Governor or governing body member comments. I just want to make sure I'm, can I go to
Go
Alice?
ahead.
Okay, go to Rob first.
Okay. Yeah, great information. I think the comments that Governor Bornstein has made is intriguing and certainly causes a lot of pause for thought. The aggregation makes a lot of sense. I think as we look at additional steps, we heard yesterday from the market expert on scarcity pricing, and I think that we need to take a look at how all this interacts. There's a lot of complexity and in trying to move forward. If we do move forward with scarcity pricing, as these things move in parallel, we need to take a look at how they would function. And so it's really more of a word of caution in exploring this and where we go first and then how they come forward.
So just so I understand that, kind of looking at the interaction between demand response and scarcity pricing a little bit more.
Yeah, and I don't know if you had a chance to listen to the presentation yesterday, but that was one of the specific areas of detail that has to be explored.
Thank you.
Governor Reynolds?
Yeah, and I know we're out of time, and so I'm not going to pose any questions and ask for answers, Anya, but I really appreciated your presentation. I appreciated the presentation of all the stakeholders. And I think it's clear, I think Governor Bornstein hit on some of the complications. I feel like there is more analysis and a thought that needs to go into taking any step here. The problems that we've heard about are very related to retail rate structures and probably created by retail rate structures. And so I guess the question is, should we be thinking about that and thinking about where the failure is on the retail rate structure? Why are the batteries being operated in a certain way such that we need to provide a market solution where we then have the retail payment come in whether or not when the resource gets picked up. And so even if it is something that wouldn't have happened without the market solution, there's still that double payment that comes in. I think Governor Bornstein kind of noted, well, it's not significant, but I think it's a bad precedent to go forward with a double payment. And, and then we can ask the question of, well, how much? I don't even really know how much is the unused capacity. I haven't seen an analysis of that. And are we just talking about unused capacity in California? The Black Hills presentation raised a lot of really interesting questions and challenges, but not really related to the proposal that is pending here. And so I guess I would just ask for consideration of a pause to really think this through, to think about the best tools that we have. And I think, from a California perspective, it's with the retail rate structure, and probably true in other states and for other utilities, an analysis of, are there similar problems and similar maybe, retail rate structure gaps in other jurisdictions? Because what we heard from Black Hills seemed a little bit different. And so I just think, really thinking about this carefully, I think Governor Bornstein's right that we don't want to make a mistake here. And that potentially this is contrary to the path that was discussed at the convening that was had at the CAISO. And I know there's a lot of talk about demand side, demand response, demand side, and distributed energy resources, and lots of great work on integrating those into the market and using them in the best way possible, including the PUC's high DER proceeding that CAISO is working on concurrently. And so the possibilities there, we need to think through how that should be structured together with this and sequenced. So I just really urge some caution here.
Thank you. I believe Governor Leslie has a question.
Yeah, I think all the comments that have been made are constructive, and I think what you're trying to do has a lot of merit. I think this is a growth area. What I raised with you in our earlier briefings is I think there's other ways things are getting aggregated, and the way the tax laws are working right now, there's a lot of incentives to do large scale DERs behind the meter. So I think nationally, this is a more interesting issue actually, because I can see some patterns with companies I know that are participating in large scale delivery of behind the meter product. So I think it's a huge growth area. So I think you have to look at it. The subtleties being raised, I think, are all fair.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. It looks to me like we've completed board and governing body comment. We do need to provide an opportunity for public comment on the agenda item. I do not see any comments in the room. Silas, can you please check to see if there are any comments online?
If you'd like to make a public comment, you can press the raise hand icon on Zoom or #2 on the phone. We have a hand up from a panelist, Jennifer Bach.
Yeah, hi everyone, and I appreciate the conversation here, especially on the dual compensation. And I think, I just want to bring it back to track one, and we think this is a very small incremental step that would really help unlock a lot of this behind the meter energy storage. We were convinced by the staff's analysis that these additional exports would be compensated as incremental participation in the wholesale market. And that's one of the reasons why we're supporting this, is we think it's a small step towards that direction. We also recognize that this is something that the CAISO can always adjust as well, as if this is adopted. But, the concern that the CCAs have is that we have a lot of these behind the meter resources that are just not realizing their potential to provide grid value and grid services and help rein in costs. And I think, this is one way that the CCAs really see this as a way to potentially control some of the RA costs in the future. But in this particular track one proposal, we see this as kind of a very small incremental step that would kind of help test this out and hopefully support more participation in this. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay. I think that's it for public comment. Thank you. Elliot, did you have a comment you want to make?
Yeah, just a couple of quick observations. We move into the next segment. So this week I found myself in a couple of different situations where I can see several sometimes seeming contradictory things being true at the same time. And I think we have a number of things in this room. And I want to, maybe I'll start out by invoking Governor Bornstein, and that is the sense that, and we've heard for a long time, that there is potential on the demand side. And I think many of us see that potential, want to try to harness it, and feel like in some ways we're kind of, we could do more. There's more there. And I think as a grid operator, having lived through some extremely stressful grid events with some very rudimentary tools, we're excited to see these mechanisms continue to evolve. And I think that the spirit here is to make sure that the CAISO is not a barrier and that we can work collaboratively with the utilities and with the regulators and other local regulatory authorities to continue helping advance this resource. I think at the same time, particularly this last week, as I've been reviewing the comments that have been coming in, the written comments, I think the comments articulated here today, just the last 24 hours, I do think there are several very important analytical and conceptual and just general risk management questions that merit some additional evaluation. I think we're all excited. I think there's a general sense of potential here. I know Anya and the team have been working really hard. I think that obviously the stakeholder process is going very well. It's clearly very inclusive. I think, though, that we're going to benefit here from kind of taking everything we've heard in the last 24, 48 hours and really, for the next round, I think just making sure that we've really identified those residual questions and come back one more time to really answer them so that I know that myself, I have a couple of key questions still here to just make sure that as we set this boat off for launch for the next chapter, that we really think we've got clear compass and clear course. So I think we've got great input, great feedback, and I'm hoping that we can make sure that we answer the questions that have been flagged here with depth and analytical rigor and to our shared satisfaction. So, yeah.
Thank you. Can I just say I appreciate the comments and, just noting we haven't said it out loud, but this is ratepayer money and we have to be very careful about the funding that comes from customers and make sure that we're serving the customers in the best way, in the most cost-effective way. So I really appreciate that, looking at this carefully and taking some time to think about it.
Good.
Okay.
All right.
I think we'll be moving on to the next agenda item, agenda item 7, briefing on analysis of congestion revenue allocation in the extended day-ahead market. We have no public comment letters on this topic, and I will turn it over to Anna McKenna to introduce the topic.
Actually, before Anna, just wanted to mention that we had 2 of the governing body members, Vice Chair Smith and Member Decker. They had to go to head to the airport to catch a flight, but they did assure me they're online. So just wanted to let folks know they're still part of the meeting.
Well, in the interest of time, I won't take too much to introduce Guillermo since you all know him very well. He will be, however, fulfilling a commitment we made on providing you some visibility as to how the congestion revenue allocation is working out in actual market operations now that we've have some data from actual market operations. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Guillermo.
Thank you, Anna. Before I go into the details of the analysis, I would like to provide some additional context, not very different to what I already provided in the previous update. And that is, there are many numbers here, and we have to recognize that they are reflecting some dynamics that we have seen. Some of those are impacted by the inherent nature of the transitional period that we're dealing with. In particular, you're going to see across many different areas that we have looked at that the first 2 weeks of May were very dynamic and is exhibiting that transitional nature of the conditions. When we implemented the extended day ahead market, we are not just adding new features to the market. It's also changing the way we operate the market. All market participants have to get familiar to that new structure, to that new design. There are brand new participants coming for the first time into an organized market. There is a change of paradigm how they operate and be able and agile enough to adapt to that new dynamic. They need time to get familiar with how the market works, understand all the processes that we have in place, and eventually some of those may show up in some of the metrics that we have here. The second part is that, again, this is preliminary information. Much of this information is actually coming from settlements. And that information is bounded to be updated once we go into the next cycle, once we internalize some fixes that we address based on identification of challenges that we observed in early May. And therefore, the numbers are subject to change, and they will change, and we will report on the final numbers when they come. The other piece is that the different metrics that you are going to see may not reflect the same time frame. Just because of the timing, we have to put the material together. For instance, settlements information always has a delay of 9 business days. So even though we may have information from the market, we don't have the information for the same period for settlements. So is that the reason you are going to see uneven information depending on what metric you are looking at? And we have spent as much time as we have available to be able to bring this information to you with a potential implication that we don't have sufficient time to look at every single angle of the data. If we do that, maybe we would be reporting this 6 months later, right? But we want to ensure that we provide you timely information, trying to balance the act with making sure that we validate the information as much as we can. And the last piece is that, in general, when we refer to the extended day-ahead market, we typically refer to the balancing areas, Pacific East, Pacific West, CAISO. Keep in mind that each balancing area is composed of many different participants. When we refer specifically to PAC, East or West, we are not talking about the merchant side specifically or only the entity. We are talking about all the participants, including PAC customers that are participating actively in the market. We don't have breakdown of those participants versus the PAC entity on its own. It's just at the whole balancing area level. Now, I will give you upfront the conclusion. And the conclusion is, based on the information that we observed for May and also for June, the revenue allocation that we have observed is within the expectations, within the projections that we had before going live, and they are at a moderate level that do not pose a concern, the concerns that were raised prior to going live. I will elaborate more on those details. As a background, as part of the implementation of the extended day-ahead market, we are using a location and marginal pricing. We do congestion management. As a result of that, we are going to have effectively congestion rents. Congestion rents is when we pay and charge the marginal congestion to all transactions that happen in the system. A key component of that design is, what do we do with the congestion revenue surplus? How do we allocate that money? Early in 2025, we have an expedited process to revise the original methodology of how we would allocate the congestion revenues between balancing areas. The current methodology that we have for day one of the extended day-ahead market is as follows. We have transmission constraints in one balancing area. If that constraint is congested, we are going to collect money from every single transaction that is impacting that constraint, regardless if that transaction is happening within the balancing area where the constraint is congested or in another area. The practical case is, if we have a constraint congested in the CAISO balancing area, and there are transactions in PAC that influence the flows on that constraint, we're going to be charging the corresponding marginal congestion price of that transaction that is arising from the CAISO constraints. The methodology is such that for that portion of the congestion that was charged to the transactions because of CAISO constraints being congested, that money goes back to PAC. That is the congestion revenue allocation. There are some qualifiers for that, and that is only the transactions that are self-scheduling in the market that are in balance, supply equals demand. If you have a demand of 100 megawatts, that has to be in balance with a supply of 100 megawatts. And they are exercising transmission rights. So we can see all that information in the system. Only for that subset of transactions, they are subject to this congestion revenue allocation. Prior to going live, there was a concern of how meaningful, how impactful this revised methodology would be. We committed to analyze and do some estimates prior to going live how big of a problem this could be. That is the briefings that we provided to you prior to go live. The last one was in April. And in that briefing, we came with some projections that we expected the impact would be moderate, and we put numbers in the range of $1.6 million to $2.5 million per month. The actual operational information that we currently have is around $1.3 million. So that is within the projections that we have. And we are coming today to brief you on this as part of our commitment of how this would work once we have actual operational information. Just to give you the main concept of this topic, now that we have an extended day-ahead market composed of CAISO, PAC East, PAC West balancing areas, we are optimizing all transactions throughout that wider footprint. We enforce transmission constraints in every single balancing area, and depending on the conditions, some of them may be congested. When there is a transaction, and let's use the illustration on the left-hand side, that goes from PAC East to PAC West, there is a direct connection between these balancing areas. We expect that most of the power is going to actually flow from PAC East to PAC West directly through that link. However, because that is part of an interconnected system, part of that power is actually going to flow throughout the rest of the transmission system. And some of that power actually is going to flow through the transmission constraints of the CAISO balancing area. That flow contribution is what we call parallel flows, on-schedule flows, loop flows. It is the influence of a transaction on a constraint that is located in a different balancing area. And this is the portion of the flow that is going to be subject to the congestion revenue allocation if they are associated with the transactions that meet the qualifiers, service schedules, balance, and exercising the transmission rights. Given the direction of the transaction and given the direction of the constraint that is congested, we can end up in two scenarios. One, the impact of the transaction can actually exacerbate the congestion on the constraint because they are moving in the same direction. In that case, that transaction is going to be charged congestion because it's exacerbating the congestion. There could be the other case around, where the congestion in the constraint is in a direction that is opposite to the flow contribution of that PAC transaction. In that case, that transaction is providing counterflow, and therefore they are going to get paid for that congestion impact. At the end of the day, it's a mesh system that we're going to account for every single contribution of every single transaction that is subject to this revenue methodology for the allocation. How can we make sense of the congestion that we have seen in the system? Before going into the specific numbers of the dollars, let me give you some intuition about the congestion that we have seen in the system. That, by the way, is very similar to the congestion that we have seen in the real-time market. Here we have a summary of the congestion expressed by the prices. At the end of the day, when there is a constraint congested, the congestion means that we are pricing that scarce transmission capacity, and that comes with a price. That price is going to be propagated to every single location in the system based on how effective or how much they influence that congestion. That is by means of the marginal congestion component, that component of the price of the full LMP. We have organized this information by two dimensions. The first one is where the congestion is happening. That could happen for the different rows in the CAISO area, PAC East, or PAC West areas. And then the columns on the right is where the effect is shown. If there is a constraint in the CAISO area, that is going to have a reflection on the price located in PAC East, PAC West, or even within the same CAISO. For CAISO perspective, we break down this between the northern system and the southern system just because of the size of the balancing area. So we have here the three main rows, CAISO, PAC East, and PAC West. Now, there is an extra complication that we have introduced with extended day-ahead market. We are doing congestion management not only for energy, that is the classical congestion management, with the introduction of imbalance reserves. Now we are doing congestion management also for that new product. So there is a congestion component price also for imbalance reserves in both directions, up and down. That is the reason that for each balancing area row block, you have energy imbalance reserves up and down. And the same applies to every single of the three balancing areas. Given that structure, let me now tell you the physics of the congestion that we saw for the first month of May. The values that we have here are dollars per megawatt hour. These are prices. Just forget about the sign convention for a minute and just focus on the magnitude of the congestion. We are seeing that for congestion that originates in the CAISO balancing area, on average, we see a price of $4.1 in the northern part of California balancing area and a price of $3 in the southern part of the system. Similarly, for locations that are within PAC East or PAC West, we have the same effect, but the magnitudes are quite different. We have an effect of 62 cents for Pacific East and 80 cents for Pacific West. It is expected that given the fact that the majority of the congestion is happening in the CAISO system, the areas more impacted are going to be the same CAISO area. It is within the same area, they are the closest to where the congestion is happening. The farther you go, electrically speaking, from where the constraint is located, the effect is going to be lower and lower. And because PAC East and PAC West are farther than within the same CAISO area, their price effect is going to be smaller. But they are impacted to the same extent with the same constraints. Similar story can be told for constraints located in PAC East that are creating congestion, and we have a price for locations within PAC East, but also a small effect on CAISO locations. Magnitude-wise, we can see that the congestion originating in PAC East is very small relative to the congestion originated in CAISO. Now, just to close this structure, let me refer to the sign convention of the values here, because it's relevant to the discussion. A positive value simply means that area is going to see a price increase in the total price because it's located on one side of the constraint. A negative price is going to see a total price decrease because it's going to exacerbate congestion and the market is decking resources to influence a redispatch that doesn't exacerbate the congestion. What it means, let me put the example for CAISO. The price in the northern part of the system is positive, the price in the south is negative. That means we are decking resources in the south and we are inking resources in the north. That means we have northbound congestion. The congestion is moving from the south to the north. Indeed, this is moving generation from southern part of the interconnection to the Pacific Northwest. And that is the structure of the prices. When we look at the direction of the congestion for PAC East and PAC West, they align very well with the CAISO structure because geographically, electrically speaking, they are in the same location. Prices for PAC West are going to align with prices in the northern part of the system of CAISO balancing area. PAC West is effectively located northern of PG&E. And correspondingly, the prices in Pacific East are going to see negative prices similar to the southern part of the CAISO balancing area. You have these two bubbles indicating that there is price separation between them and the power is flowing from the south to the north. This is the intuition behind the congestion that we have seen so far for May that is pretty similar to the congestion that we saw for June. Next slide, please. Now, let me pause on that and bring one other element that is relevant to this discussion, and that is the congestion revenue allocation is going to be relevant only for transactions that are self-scheduled, imbalance, and subject to and associated with exercising transmission rights. We have tracked those volumes that were put in the market by Pacific East and Pacific West, and this is the trend that we see. We can see that there is some dynamics in the first week expected, given all the changes and the familiarization that we have with the system working. In general, we see that PAC East and PAC West are very steady in terms of the volume of self-schedules they have after the first week and continues to happen for the whole month of June. And the composition of how much is generation versus imports, supply in total versus demand composed by exports and own demand is in the left-hand side. So if we look at only at the subset of self-generation from PAC East that is subject to the congestion revenue allocation, about 75% of that subset of transactions are associated with the self-scheduling of generation. Pac West is much lower, it's in the range of 31%. Next slide. Putting these pieces together now, we have one key metric, and that is, given the congestion that happened in the system across the different balancing areas, how much money was collected because of congestion? We track this on a daily basis, and what we have in total is about $39.9 million across the entire EDAN footprint. The majority of the congestion happened in the CAISO area, and therefore the majority of the congestion revenues are going to be collected in the CAISO area. Out of the $39.9 million, about $38.2 million was originated from the CAISO constraints. And that means about 1.7 million was collected or originated from the PAC East balancing area. There was no congestion observed in the Pacific West area, and therefore there is nothing to really track for the congestion revenue allocation. Next slide, please. And here is the most important metric of the whole briefing. This is a daily trend of the congestion revenue allocation that is returned to PAC because of this methodology that we have in place. The trend is very dynamic. It's subject to the dynamics of the congestion that we see, and that changes day to day. Overall, we have total congestion on the CAISO area in the range of $38.2 million. Out of all that congestion, $1.34 million is subject to the congestion revenue allocation methodology, and that is about a small portion of the total congestion. This is the number that we have indicated that is within the expectations, within the projections that we did prior to go live, and it's a level relatively low in comparison to the overall congestion that we have in the system. At this point, we have not seen any concerns in this dynamic, and it's indeed as we have projected prior to go live. That's the information I wanted to share. Happy to take on any questions at this point.
I think actually before questions, we would probably want
Just
to
continue on?
To
Okay.
continue on, yes, with the other entities that will be
Okay.
presenting.
Thank you, Bert. I just wanted to note, this is Anna McKenna. I just wanted to note that next will be a presentation and reflections and thoughts by Mike Walding, VP of Energy Supply Management at PacifiCorp. And Mike will be sharing with us their views on what Guillermo just presented and their experience. And then after that, I wanted to note that Chair Campbell will be providing a summary and update of the discussion that we had and that was had at the June governing body meeting, in which we had stakeholders reflect on what is currently being considered in the stakeholder process with regards to the policy enhancements that we're thinking of with regards to congestion revenue allocation methodology. And so with that, I will turn it over to Mike.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having me today. Appreciate the time. And just want to confirm that folks can hear me.
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, perfect. Great. Thank you. Yeah, so I would just like to offer just maybe a few comments and I'll be brief. PacifiCorp continues to be engaged in the congestion revenue allocation and the stakeholder process that the CAISO has ongoing, and understanding that this current methodology that we have in place in the market is a temporary solution, and that we, and the CAISO and as the market operator will continue to analyze this and continue to stakeholder process this in the future to arrive at a more durable solution. Maybe just a few thoughts that I wanted to provide. I think Guillermo also mentioned it in an earlier presentation that I caught the tail end of, is, when you look at our self schedules, and I know that was a concern going into the market as potentially too much of an incentive to self-schedule within the market. And I know we've been very outspoken about that. So when you look at the kind of that first week of the market, you see, maybe an outsized amount of self-schedules from Pacific Corp, and compared to the rest of the time that Guillermo had analyzed and had shown. And like I said, I think he mentioned it in a prior presentation as well. But some of that's just learning the market and coming into the market. And even though we had parallel operations, there were some things that Pacific Corp, just was getting used to and learning as we, and specifically speaking for our merchant shop, getting used to and learning as far as bidding resources and how that would work, and trying different things to make sure that we were, optimizing things like gas supply and things of that nature. And then also, you might be aware as well that we kind of had a curveball thrown at us right before market launch I think the day before we launched the market, where FERC ordered us to use our default energy bids and did not give us market-based rate authority in EDAM. And so as we were going through parallel ops, there were some default energy bids that needed to be cleaned up specifically around certain resources and certain resource types, and so some of that caused the need to self-schedule, especially in the beginning. And so then as we've moved through and kind of had those learnings and gained experience in the market, there still are reasons where Pacific Corp and our merchant function will need to self-schedule. We have contracts that have been entered into, obviously, pre-EDAM. So specifically, we have a large amount of qualifying facility contracts where those are kind of must-run resources that we do not have the ability to curtail those. And so we obviously would need to self-schedule all of our qualifying facilities. And then also contracts that are some of our early renewable contracts that also don't give us the opportunity to curtail, so needing to self-schedule some of those as well. And then when we look at our thermal fleet, and as folks are aware, the ancillary services, contingency reserves regulation, frequency response, none of that is optimized within the extended day ahead market. And so we self-provision those ancillary services and provide that schedule for those products to the CAISO as the market operator. And in order to set up our system accordingly, some of those are being held on certain resources, certain thermal resources that we will need to self-schedule at a certain level to be able to hold that capacity for those ancillary services. And then we would economically bid the remaining capacity. So lots of different reasons, I guess, including bilateral transactions that are made at the market purchases, market sells at this point in the market without intertie bidding, that where self-scheduling is necessary, but not that we are doing that as an incentive to receive the hedge on congestion and to using it to manage our congestion. We firmly believe, and we entered into this market to capture benefits for our customers, and that the benefits of kind of economically participating in the market through bidding our resources far outweigh the potential incentive to hedge against congestion by self-scheduling all of our resources and to balance with our load. And then maybe I'll just stop there and happy to answer any questions if anyone has anything.
Chair Campbell, did you have your, was there something yeah, I think this is time for you to.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm going to provide actually a summary of my summary, which is summarizing the discussion we had at the June 17th governing body meeting held in Santa Ana Pueblo in New Mexico. And during the general session, we received a spotlight briefing from CAISO staff on the ongoing EDAM congestion revenue allocation initiative, which is currently in the stakeholder working group phase. The initiative is focused on long-term design for congestion revenue allocation to EDAM and potentially some intermediate steps. We heard from NV Energy, Pacificor, Western Power Trading Forum, and Southern California Edison. Those were the entities formerly on the agenda, but some other organizations also provided comment. And really getting to the more highly summarized piece of this. So there's three concepts that are being explored there. One of them is a kind of a longer term concept that's more of a kind of an entitlement sort of approach. And there were stakeholders that supported really focusing on that longer term approach. There was other stakeholders who wanted to do more work on the long-term approach, but also wanted to take an intermediate step, really just sort of tweaking, a modification to the current approach. And then there were also stakeholders who wanted to focus on that modification of the current approach and were not ready to really look forward to the longer-term approach. Just some of the kind of issues that were brought up, which I thought was quite interesting, some of the motivations for why people were landing where they were. Some folks are really focusing on cost shifts, just making sure the priorities on eliminating cost shifts and maybe even migrating over time away from open access transmission tariff. That was a perspective shared. But then also we're hearing priority put around making sure that existing transmission rights, that those continue to provide a pricing hedge. And then there were also considerations in more practical and immediate levels. Some focus on the just wanting to maintain some stability in the near term around the design because there was assumption of stability in some of the market benefits estimates. And there's entities who are right in the process and will be in the process in 27 and 28 and joining the market. And so there's just the practical kind of software implementation aspects of that. And so some of those entities were raising concerns about moving to a different paradigm during the same time frame that they're implementing the current paradigm. So that's kind of the summary of the summary. There are each of the entities who presented provided a really concise slide deck that it really is a great document. Those are great documents to look at. Those are available on the Western Energy Markets website as under the meeting materials. And overall, I found the perspectives to be extremely valuable. I appreciate the work and attention that's continuing to go to this topic. I look forward to continuing to follow this important effort, informed by operational experience and further analysis, such as what Guillermo just shared. And I'm also looking forward to more analysis and thoughts from the Department of Market Monitoring, from the Market Surveillance Committee, and potentially from the governing body market expert over time. Thanks.
Thank you, Andy. Now I think is the opportunity for the board or governing body members. If you have any questions or comments for any of the presentations on this item, now would be your opportunity to do so. Joe.
Again, thank you, Guillermo. I think it's really important to be tracking these early outcomes from EDAM. And I expect you're going to come back with a June report shortly. What is your expectation for that? I have two questions. One is the expectation, then I have a larger question I want to ask also.
Yeah, actually, we already have the numbers ready. It was not possible to include those in this briefing, but for June, you may see in the trend that we show that the first half of June tended to be higher than May, but after that subsided for the rest of the month. So the total value of the allocation for June is actually $1.29 million. That is lower than the $1.34 million from May.
Okay, great. And then my second larger question is, I know from the transmission plan we approved earlier in the discussion around that Neil's already looking at ways of reducing congestion on that north-south path through new transmission construction. At that point, does that make a lot of these problems go away, or does it change the character of them?
Let me just give some context. I think not all constraints are created equal in that sense. As a reference, we have over 100 constraints, different constraints, congested at any time in the day-ahead market. When we look at in the perspective of a single month, there may be benefits to potentially do some transmission expansion improvements that could mitigate a specific congestion on one transmission constraint. But the reality is that there are too many constraints in the CAISO balancing area that congestion is bounded to still happen to some
Well,
extent.
we're just going to move from one constraint to the next constraint, obviously. I mean, I know there's a chase in the congestion around that, but it will help.
Yeah, and no doubt, transmission upgrades, especially if it's paralleling the constraint that is binding, will help. But I also want to give insight that other transmission development that is already in development will also provide maybe sooner value and reduction of some of that congestion that you're seeing today. So it's not just something that's out 10 years. There's other transmission that's being developed right now that could do that as well. And I'll be specific, things like SWIP North is a parallel path to this.
No, and I think that's really important to bear in mind as we think about how much priority to give to these congestion issues, because they're changing over time as the topology changes. And that is an important perspective in terms of either the urgency or the amount that's at risk.
And these types of congestions are considered when they're doing the transmission planning itself. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. I guess I think Rob is next.
Thank you. Guillermo, really appreciate the information that you went through, and I noticed you were very, very careful in trying to provide that overall thought of what this information really tells us. And let me assure you, there's a question here. So, you know, it was just a little over a year ago when these two boards met, and based upon all the information presented and the concerns expressed by the Market Surveillance Committee, the market expert, and DMM, and staff's assessment that the interim arrangement was approved. And then it was requested that simulation be done. Simulations were done. And then we asked that this be tracked carefully. And so you've been doing that, and you're going to continue to do that. It would appear, at least based upon this very preliminary, this first snapshot here, and we'll hear again in August, that we're doing okay, that we did not see the congestion problem get skewed, that we are operating and seeing results within bounds, and that as we look at how soon the interim arrangements need to be concluded and a new, more permanent solution brought in, at least in this very short period of time, is not critical, at least not yet, and that we're having the performance as expected. And so as we continue to look at how this performs and how this new solution ultimately comes in, we can be thoughtful on this, and then we'll be able to have this new information, and hopefully when Portland General comes in, we'll have this additional information to be incorporated, and we don't need to rush and come up with something that you know then becomes a different or alternate interim solution. Would you generally agree that we are doing okay, and then we can continue to track this to see where we want to be?
Yes, I think generally I agree with that conclusion, and that is the conclusion I'm trying to convey. I would only add a caveat here, because all the assessment that we did prior to go live and the assessment that you have in front of you is based on the original day one EDAM footprint, that is specifically PACIS, WEST, and CAISO. Through the discussions of this initiative, there has been some concern that, well, the dynamics may be slightly different once we have a wider footprint, and we have committed to actually provide a second round of analysis pre-go live for a wider footprint. That is something that we are doing right now.
Thank you, because I know that as we get this additional information and we see the performance over a bigger footprint, right, we're going to have a better assessment and a better understanding of what needs to be done. if anything. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the board or governing body members? Severn?
I'll be real quick. It's late. I'm still trying to figure out from Mike's discussion from Pacific Core if Pacific Core is not self-scheduling out of devotion to the market or economic self-interest. Because or maybe those are the same, but my memory from the earlier discussion is that we didn't expect a big problem with Pacific Core. The bigger issue is going to be expansion with some of the other potential soon joiners. And if there's much we can learn from this about, is the risk less than we thought of the distortions from this interim approach? And, we're not going to get to a perfect market design, and maybe this is good enough and we don't have to worry much more. That's, I guess, the question we ultimately have to resolve here.
Okay. Without further board or governing body comments, it's time to move to potential public comment. There, again, are no public comments in the room on this agenda item. Silas, if you could please check to see if there are any public comments online.
If you have a public comment, you can press the raise hand icon on Zoom or #2 on the phone. We do have one hand up from Abram Klein. You've been sent a prompt to unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Abram Klein with Appian Way Energy Partners. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we
Okay,
can.
terrific. I'll be relatively brief because I know it's late, and thank you for the opportunity to comment here. Appian Way is a financial trader active in the CAISO market and also futures markets in the West, and we've been very involved in the CRR enhancements and also the EDAM groups. And I just want to first off thank and commend CAISO staff, in particular Guillermo, for the EDAM congestion revenue allocation spotlight analysis today. And clearly it's critical to analyze and keep stakeholders informed about how EDAM is performing in practice. For these comments, I just wanted to step out onto the balcony a little bit and talk about some of those broader issues from a bigger picture perspective, because you could get the impression from the breakdown of congestion in the slide deck that the loop flow issue is not very material. And I don't think that that's the intention of CAISO staff to necessarily give that impression, as Guillermo said in response to some of the questions. Pacific Corp transactions are only a small subset of transactions causing loop flow in CAISO. And this loop flow issue really sits at the intersection of the EDAM congestion revenue allocation market design, CRR market design, and also Western market seems coordination. And in our opinion, what we support and believe that collectively, we really need to know how much of the transfer capability in CAISO is being used by CAISO entities and how much is consumed by external entities, whether it's Pacific Corp or otherwise. And that can inform sort of the materiality of this loop flow issue. And in particular, it's important to understand how this breakdown has changed over the past several years, because as more and more resources are developed in the desert Southwest, this loop flow issue, we believe, has become more material for California entities and ratepayers. So in our view, solving EDAM congestion revenue allocation and also Western market seams coordination ultimately requires a business agreement among stakeholders regarding what the fair allocation of rights to flow on the transmission networks of the respective balancing areas. And we've provided some written comment on this loop flow issue for tomorrow's Board of Governors meeting with respect to the CRR enhancements phase 1 decision, and that is posted on the website for tomorrow's meeting. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that comment. I don't believe we have any other public comments, so we'll move on to these last two agenda items, which I believe will go quite quickly, or hopefully they will. If not, I guess we'll find out. Next one is agenda item 8, informational reports. There are 2 informational reports. There's a DMM market monitoring update, and there was a market surveillance committee update. Do the board or governing body members have any questions with respect to those reports? Being none, we do need to provide an opportunity for public comment on that as well. So there seem to be no public comments in the room on that. Silas, can you check if there are any public comments online?
If you'd like to make a comment, you can press the raise hand or #2. There are no public comments.
Okay, great. Last agenda item, which is future agenda items. Board and governing body members, are there any future agenda items that you would like to raise or speak about before we close today? I see none at all. Okay, well, great. With that, I believe we can now adjourn the meeting rather. Thank you very much.
Enjoy.